friends what I'm about to tell you, and they urged me to share it here. It happened back in December, about a week before Christmas. So, I'm a 32-year-old guy currently using my GI Bill to go to college in a city in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm so busy with school and work, so I just don't really have time to go out and socialize often. I have to rely a lot on apps to go on dates, and I matched this really cute girl around my age. We had a good convo and we scheduled a date. It was at a bar restaurant, not far for either of us to drive to, so it was easy enough. She was very pretty in person and we got along great. During our conversation too, I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, like a receptionist essentially. I also learned that she had a roommate, whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her apparently. I was a little bit uneasy at that, and I told her as much as well, and she said that he's harmless, so I kind of let it go. We had a few more drinks, and we're there for about another hour, and at her suggestion she said that we should go back to her place. And I mean, I wasn't about to argue with it. She was hot. She then insisted on driving, and I told her that I was fine, and she said no, that I had been drinking and she saw too many DUIs at her job. I got what she was saying, but I only had 2 gin and tonics and was fine, and again she insisted. I thought that it was weird, but I didn't care. Maybe she was just trying to be nice. Anyway, we went to her house, and the first odd thing that I noticed was that she walked up and just opened the door. She didn't unlock it is what I mean. It was already open, which I found very odd because she said that she had a stalker and that her roommate was gone. She started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that, I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either, I noticed. I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated and said that she ate a snack before heading to the bar. But it just didn't make any sense, and before I could say anything, she just kissed me and wrapped her arms around me seductively and said for me to take her to her room. Again, she was really hot, and I quit caring about the cereal pretty quickly. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe 5 or so, we were in bed and my back was to the window, and she let out a huge gasp, a scared gasp. Her eyes were at the window, and I turned around and saw somebody in a hoodie, and they took off. I heard the steps running on her back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran out to make sure her doors were locked, and of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging. I went to open it because I was gonna mess this dude up, or try to at least, and she told me to just go back to bed with her. I screamed at her at this point and asked if she was insane, and she told me that he does this and goes away. So I asked her, "You know that this is your ex?" And she said yes, and to not worry about it. At this point, he started banging on the side of the house on the other end, and she didn't seem at all to care and just kept trying to get me to go back to her bed. I didn't want to call the cops because, for all I know, this dude is a cop, or she'd know the cops that showed up and would take her side or whatever. I also couldn't just leave because my car was at the bar now, and quite honestly, I was pretty terrified as well. At this point, I started calling her out for the door not being locked, the cereal. I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with logical answers, and I had no idea what I was into at this stage. I shouldn't have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much kicked in, and I told her that if this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise that I'm going to kill you both. I'm not hard like that or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what it was, that they would definitely have a fight on their hands at the very least. My thoughts of what were going to happen to me were all over the place, so in the end, I ordered an Uber off of my phone and I didn't tell her. I just kept arguing with her and asking what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so that I could leave ASAP. Luckily, I never got my pants off, and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was able to get dressed pretty quickly. The Uber showed up, and without saying anything, I just opened her door and ran out as fast as I could. I looked back at the door, and weirdly, she was just standing there. It's only been a little over a month now, but I honestly have no idea what the heck I was into that night. I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex, based off of the factors that I've already told you. It feels like it was either a robbery or some sort of weird fetish type thing. I don't know, but it's definitely something that I'm very mad at myself for. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet and allowed myself to get into a situation like that. I reported her account on the Uber ride back to the bar, and I told the bartender as well if they ever saw her again, just in case, but who knows. In any case, I'm just glad that I got out of there unscathed. The following took place in approximately 1990 in a Southern California medical school morgue. I will relate things in detail as I can clearly still remember them as if it was yesterday. So, the entrance to the main morgue office and laboratory is housed behind a solid, secure pair of double doors. These doors are often left open during work hours, but if nobody is in the office, they are secured. As soon as you step through the threshold in front of you, about a yard away is a big blue shower curtain that conceals the room behind it. To the right is the office area that is somewhat cramped with 3 large desks and 1 huge filing cabinet. The extremely basic files of each case, their ID number and death certificate, are initially kept in the file drawers until after the case has been used or moved on to its next location. To the left is a large storage area that houses large freezers for bodies, as well as numerous shelves with specimens and supplies. As cliché as it may sound, the day of my sighting started out like any other. I was the only one working on 3 separate cases that were all situated on their respective gurneys, and also in their own level of the embalming process. I had been working on the cases for maybe about 3 hours, without interruption from any of my co-workers. I think it's safe to say that I was very absorbed in my work on that particular day. It was getting close to lunch, however, so I decided to wash up and head to the office to take my lunch. As I passed by the door to the room that held the 3 large vertical refrigerators and the row upon row of already embalmed bodies, I looked to my right and clearly saw a full-sized apparition. I froze in my footsteps, like a character in a cartoon, and looked to my right further to see an older man standing in front of the closest vertical refrigerator. It was simply standing there. I could see through him, but at the same time clearly identify it as a person. As I stood there and looked for what seemed like minutes, it was probably only seconds though, the apparition turned and looked at me, and simply faded away and disappeared, almost like cigarette smoke dissipates into its environment. I continued to look in that direction, dumbfounded by what I had just seen. It was not scary in the least, but almost comforting, I guess, as if it was a completely natural, everyday occurrence. I merely went into the office and saw my co-worker William and exclaimed, "You won't believe what I just saw." He was completely unfazed though and looked at me and said, "You saw a ghost." I was more taken aback by his knowing what I had seen than what I had truly seen, to be honest. He went on to tell me that he had seen them quite often and enjoys the interaction when it happens. When we told our co-worker Joe what I saw, they were completely taken aback, scared and frantic. I tried to explain the visit as more of a comforting interaction than one like, think of a typical Hollywood haunting or whatever. That offered little comfort though, and the rest of the day it was rather off-kilter, I guess. One of the other employees that works for the morgue office, in a paperwork capacity exclusively, was Lola. She worked way down the hall, away from the actual work facilities. She was basically responsible for processing every piece of paper that needed to be dealt with through our office, that is. She was a petite, insightful lady who believed strongly in spirited events that involve interactions with the deceased. She would often attend seance-like events with friends and has reported successful contacts. She had plans to attend one of her spiritual meetings. The following day, she would bring it up to the group in attendance, and we all kind of thought that that was kind of neat, but really just shrugged it off and didn't think of her involvement in the situation again. That was until 3 days later when she came to speak to us about what she had come across. Apparently, her group leader during this seance-like meeting reached out inquiring as to the desire of the apparition that appeared before me. The group leader received the sense that the apparition was just somewhat confused and didn't quite know where to go. This theme continued during the meeting, with the apparition just being uncomfortable and lacking direction. The other extremely noteworthy feeling, though, the group leader came across was the letter W constantly appearing before her, apparently. It was as if the whole meeting and the interaction with the apparition revolved around the level of confusion in the letter W over and over again. Everyone's curiosity was spiked by what Lola had to say, though, me especially. We all then walked over to where I saw the apparition, and I explained to everybody what I had seen and where I saw it. And that's when things got a little bit eerie. I don't recall who noticed it first, but in one of the refrigerators directly in front of where I saw the apparition was a name tag or label, and the tag said William Wood. There's no doubt in my mind as to what I saw that day, and reflecting back upon it, I believe my conscious level of thinking was down while my subconscious level was up, having been so involved in working on the cases all morning. I think that somehow this allowed my subconscious or inner spirit, or whatever you want to call it, to perhaps see something that I would not normally see. A sort of heightened level of relaxation, of openness, so to speak. And as you can probably see, all of this has really stuck with me. A quick bit of background. I'm an American now living in Vienna, and this happened a few months ago. Life has been normal since then, so I don't think it really has any harm or anything on me, but I'll let you be the judge of that. So I was in my apartment when someone buzzed the entrance to our building. I was not expecting anything from Amazon or so, but sometimes when such delivery people need to enter, they buzz all the apartments in the building. I have a dog and he goes barking when they buzz, so I ignored that buzz and calmed my dog down. A few minutes later, they ring my apartment door. Again, my dog goes crazy, so I try to calm him down. A minute or two later, I answer the door and there's this man who seems to be ringing the door opposite of mine in the hallway. The lady that lives there never answers the door and is very private, so no surprise that nobody answered. But the man was tall, 50s or so, with glasses, dressed in a suit and a coat with a hat. Literally think of the spy emoji and you'll get the idea, minus the mustache and the glasses, but he was also wearing this earpiece thing. I'm not sure if it was a camera or a microphone, but it resembled a Bluetooth device from the mid-2000s, if that makes sense, and it was only in one ear. I'm noticing all of these things, but at the same time I decided to just sort of play along a bit. To be honest, I really wasn't sure what I was doing. I just figured if someone wanted to investigate me that I had nothing to hide, so why get all worked up about it? The man then says in German that he's looking for so-and-so family that live upstairs, and that he's been looking for them and trying to contact them for 2 years now. Odd too, because just the week before Amazon dropped off my package with them and I had to go to their door to ask for it, so I saw them and I know that they're there. I tell him that my German isn't that great, so then he asks if I want him to speak in English, French, Spanish, Russian, etc. I found that pretty interesting, and out of curiosity I said Spanish, I'm fluent. So from here on, the conversation between us was all in Spanish. I tell him that I don't know the family that well, but I saw them, and basically try to end the conversation. But then he asks me where I'm from, and I say the US. He tells me all this stuff about how back in the day he lived and worked in the US, and how he knew Kamala Harris back when she was a prosecutor and stuff like this. It was really weird, but this is some kind of clue to me that if it's true he was admitting to being some kind of an investigator, or maybe a spy or prosecutor or whatever, that he had connections. He asks me what state I'm from, and I say Texas. Again, this was all in Spanish, but I notice that as I'm saying this, he pulls his phone from his pocket and is kind of holding it directly in front of me. I start to think that maybe he's audio recording, but the screen looked dark, as in the phone was asleep. But he asks what state like 3 times. Nowhere in our conversation did he seem to have hearing problems, and all of a sudden his phone is out and he seems like he can't hear me. Something is off. I get weirded out, so I circle back and tell him that I don't have any other info of the family upstairs, and that's it. I say goodbye, and I close the door. So, do you guys have any ideas as to who this guy is or what he could be? Like I said, it was months ago, but I am definitely still on edge and still wonder about it. I mean, what was that weird earpiece thing? And if he were a spy, why make it so obvious? What about the phone thing? And if he was just looking for me or wanted info about something, why was he ringing the next door after I ignored the door a minute to calm my dog down? It was all really strange, and I just don't know what to think about it. This happened a couple of years ago, March 24th of 2022. I was 16 and had just got my license. My friend's family was going on a day trip to the beach, Pacific City, Oregon, and a few of our friends decided, since I got my license and a new car, that we would load up in my old 300ZX, take the T-tops off, and go for a nice trip to the coast. All was going well, other than the discomfort of 4 guys crammed into a small coupe on a 2-hour drive, but we eventually made it to the coast and had a really good day. After we had packed up our things and started to head home, my friend suggested that we take a road that he knew. It was an access road for anyone familiar with the Tillamook Forest, but it was to go back home instead of the main highway, and it would take about an extra 45 to 60 minutes, but he said that it was really nice and would be a nice change in scenery, so I obliged. The sun was setting, and in the thick forest it got pretty dark quickly, and before we knew it, there was also no cell service, no houses, and absolutely no cars, which is pretty typical for the mountain ranges between the Oregon coast and the Portland metro area, so it wasn't anything that I was too worried about. After about 10 more miles, I saw a green SUV, either a Dodge Durango or a Ford Escape, early 2000 models, hauling a 5th wheel, crashed and off the side of the road. Being that nobody was around, I decided that we should probably pull over and see if everyone was okay, and offer any help that we could. It was probably 8 to 10 feet off the road on a slope, only caught by the trees that it had hit, and the 5th wheel was absolutely trashed. Both of the sidewalls were caved in, with the contents of the RV spread all along the side of the drop-off. The SUV was filled with clothes and food wrappers. Almost all of the windows were shattered, and there were some pretty significant bloodstains on what was left of the driver door glass and the windshield, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary for how bad the crash was. There was no one in or near the car, and a truck had stopped by us, and we told him that we didn't see anyone, and that we would just be on our way, so he kept driving, and shortly after, we started our journey back on the road. But we had to go pretty slow, as the conditions of the road were getting worse and worse, with massive potholes and cracks in the road, and it was definitely not intended for lower cars. I'd say about maybe 3 to 5 miles after the crash site, there was a pretty sharp right-hand turn with a pullover area on the apex of the turn. As my dim headlights lit up the trees behind the pull-off, I suddenly saw what looked like a pale man with saggy skin from what I could tell was fully naked, but was sort of behind some of the tall grass or shrubs, so could really only see up to the bottom of its stomach. But it had no hair and was kind of scrunched over like how you would imagine an old man hunched over, just staring at my car. It didn't have prominent features, but the biggest part that I remember is its eyes reflected my headlights, bright like a cat's eyes, and its whole body turned to keep looking at the car as we drove by. I really didn't know what to do or what to think of it, and my friends in the car were all staring behind us and claimed that it kind of leaned out of the shrubs to watch us drive off. We were all pretty freaked out by this, and we were discussing what we had just seen, whether we thought it was a tweaker that had crashed his car and just sort of walked off, or if it was some sort of paranormal creature or something. I kind of played it off as the first option, but the more I thought about it, it seemed like something that you'd see in a liminal space or bad AI-generated image or something. No eyebrows, no hair, pale white saggy skin like when a person loses hundreds of pounds in a small amount of time, except it was saggy on its cheeks and neck and arms, etc., but seemed scrawny and really frail. Well, in any case, we sped home and I kind of just told people the story when the subject of paranormal experiences came up, and I didn't think too much more of it. About July of 2023, my at-the-time girlfriend's brother and I were pretty close, and so him, his friend, and I were up driving through the trails of Dixie Mountain talking ghost stories and such when I told them this story, and her brother's friend said that he had seen the same crash and actually showed me a picture of the same SUV that I saw, but he said that he didn't see anything creepy. But it was kind of weird to know that somebody else that I knew had seen this crash too. I don't know what I saw or what happened, but it definitely scared me and my friends, and I've never been back on that road since that day. Maybe somebody here, though, has seen something or had a similar experience in the Oregon wilderness. I hadn't thought about it until I started sharing this story today. My partner and I were reading a book about cryptozoology and mythological creatures, and it made me think of this story because it's always just sat really uneasy with me. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I apologize that my storytelling abilities aren't really all that great, but this is what happened, and I really just don't have an explanation. So do you wish a thrilling fantasy lived rent-free in your head instead of your endless to-do list? Well, with Dipsy Stories, you can trade mundane thoughts for spicy narratives that will make you feel like you're living in a romance novel. Dipsy is the female-founded app for spicy audiobooks and more, created by women for the female gaze. Their app has over 1,000 spicy audiobooks, all crafted by a team of professional writers and top-tier narrators. And if you're anything like me and a bit of an insomniac, then you're going to love their section for sleep. I personally really enjoyed their section with ambient sounds like winter rain, and actually ended up falling asleep to one that night, which was really nice. And with their easy-to-explore app, you can search for your favorite romance genres like contemporary, historical, dark, sports, western, romantasy, sapphic, and more. New chapters are released every week, so you'll always find something new to enjoy. And for listeners of the show, Dipsy is offering an extended 30-day free trial when you go to dipsystories.com/scared. That's 30 days of full access for free when you go to dipseastories.com/scared. dipsystories.com/scared. I have suffered with sleep paralysis since I was a child. Throughout all of my years of dealing with this, I've had some truly horrific experiences. However, the one that I had a couple of days ago has been the worst one yet. So I woke up not feeling the greatest. I was up a few hours, and after not feeling much better, I decided to lay back down and try to nap it off. I was turned on my side, facing away from our bedroom door on the far side of mine and my husband's king-size bed. I felt my body relax and I fell asleep rather quickly. The next thing that I remember is slowly opening my eyes and seeing our bedroom wall and the door that leads to our bathroom, as the bathroom door was closed. I then tried to move and I couldn't. As I've been through this many times, I was already mentally telling myself that I was in sleep paralysis and I needed to focus on trying to move a little bit, such as wiggling my fingers. It's a tip that I learned online. However, I'm already feeling scared and I can feel my heart racing. I then hear the sound of our bedroom door open and close behind me as our bedroom door makes a very loud and distinct popping noise. I immediately thought that it was my husband coming in to check on me and thought that he'd be able to get me to snap out of this horror. But that thought quickly vanished as I heard heavy stomping running around the bed until they stopped directly in front of me, and I see a very large and tall black figure standing in front of our bathroom door. This is the same figure that I encounter in almost all of my sleep paralysis experiences. I can never make out any features, but before I can register any other thoughts, the larger figure lunges at me. I can never make out any other features, but before I can register any other thoughts, the large figure lunges at me. I feel the heavy weight of this thing on my body and it feels like it's crushing me, especially in my ribs. As previously mentioned, I'm still laid on my side with both of my arms pulled up and my hands are tucked under my pillow. By now I've closed my eyes and I'm trying desperately to move. And that is when I feel teeth burying into my ribs. I don't know how to truly describe the awful feeling that this was, but it's an intense feeling of pressure, pain, and almost a tickling sensation, and it's one of the worst things that I have ever felt. At this point, I'm trying to thrash away and trying to scream, but I'm still completely paralyzed, and I feel like I have no air left in me, and I never am able to even make a sound. But I can literally feel this thing's mouth opening and closing in different spots along the side of my ribs. At this point, I'm mentally screaming and pleading to snap out of it. The next thing I know, I sit straight up in bed. My heart is racing, I broke out in a cold sweat, and I can still feel tingles in my ribs and on my left side. After my eyes dart around the room and I find it to be completely empty, I lift up my shirt to inspect my side. The skin is not broken, but the whole left side of my rib cage is bright red, like something or someone has been there. I've done a good amount of research on sleep paralysis and I understand the scientific explanation for it, but waking up with physical marks from these experiences, that is brand new to me and a whole nother thing. I have had a ton of anxiety when it's bedtime ever since this experience, and quite honestly, I find it a bit hard to believe that there's nothing evil or demonic about these sleep attacks. Pennsylvania, 2004. My dad was 15 and camping by himself in a forest one afternoon. He wasn't armed with much besides a hunting knife and his phone, with the only thing keeping him sheltered being his tent. After setting up and adjusting his tent, he decides to make a fort around his tent for protection using sticks and branches. He set off for a 1-hour journey, picking up and breaking off as many branches as he could find and dropping them off at the site. And after an hour and a half rolled by, he was pretty much done. He set up his fort and eventually he went to bed. It was about 8 to 9 p.m., I would say. After 3 hours of sleep, he woke up to the sound of a dog barking right next to his tent, about 30 feet, he said. He was kind of on edge about this, but didn't think too much of it, and just laid there with his eyes closed. After about 5 minutes of just laying there, that was when it happened. A hand grabbed into his tent and pulled him out of it. My dad then described seeing a creature, it being around 7 to 8 feet tall, pink skin, slits for eyes and a mouth, no nose, and incredibly jacked and ripped. My dad was paralyzed with fear and couldn't move his body at all. The creature held him right to his face, and my dad could hear the intense breathing of this creature. He described it as resembling that of a bull's breathing. As he could do nothing but stare at it, he noticed what appeared to be some sort of a device on its wrist, what appeared to be a watch or something. After about 3 minutes of staring at each other, the creature let him go and grabbed his leg, swinging him on the ground repeatedly with extreme force. 15 minutes of this passed and the creature finally stopped. It placed my dad back into his tent and wandered off. My dad was doing nothing but praying to Jesus in his head the whole time, but after he finally got a bit of a grip of himself, he called 911 but hung up shortly afterward, realizing that they would think that he was crazy for sure. He then called my aunt, but she wasn't responding, so he texted her a bunch of messages. His body and legs were in a lot of pain, but eventually he must have fallen asleep or passed out or something. When morning rolled in, he woke up and inspected the place, gingerly sort of limping around. And weirdly, nothing was touched. The place was just like it had been when he first set it up. Feeling uneasy, he left the forest, and it took him some time to get back with how sore he was, but eventually he made it back and he went home. And as far as I know, he never went back to that place. This happened back in October, and let me start with some context. I, female and 19, work at a typical photo studio that's placed within a retail store. I'm not going to name which one, but your first guess is probably correct. On this particular day, I was scheduled to work 3 to 7, which was our closing hours. And unless there's an oversaturation of appointments in a particular time, it's usually only one employee working at a time. It's in the basement of the 2-floor retail store tucked away in a little back corner. Now, on this particular day, I'm coming in to close the studio. My manager and co-worker were there at the time, and they were both getting off at about 3:30. I clocked in at our computers and started chatting with my boss about where we were. There was one family in the camera room, and they were running a little behind. She told me about my assigned family, and also encouraged me to get what's called a pull-in. Basically, where we try to get customers from the retail store to come and take photos in whatever they're in exchange for 2 free photos fully shipped and covered. There was a man wearing a prison-looking uniform. Definitely didn't look real, but it looked like a costume or something. It was October anyway, so it wasn't crazy that he was wearing a costume. It wasn't Halloween weekend or Halloween day though, which I thought was a bit weird since he didn't have any appointments or was standing around with practically barren areas of the retail store next to the studio just sort of wandering. I don't think my boss got a good look at how he was acting yet because she asked him if he wanted to come in for some photos. She said something about how he already had the costume and it would be perfect. I didn't hear much of this because I was checking in with the next family. My boss walked by me as I was about to head in to set up the studio and let me know that the guy was interested in some photos after this appointment. The family that I was working with was great and things went smoothly, but I noticed during the session that he had come to sit on the bench closest to the photo studio. No big deal, but this bench is usually used for parents to watch or put their belongings on, but it's not like he was expected to know that, so it wasn't a big deal. My boss popped into the photo room one last time before she left and told me something along the lines of, "Hey, I'm getting some weird vibes from that guy that you're going to photograph, so I'm going to have Andrew, the retail store manager, come by and check in and make sure that everything's going all right." After taking the photos, it takes me a few minutes to edit them. The customer goes out and I stay in the camera room just doing the editing on the computer and all that. So the family went and sat down at a different bench. At this point, the guy started walking into the studio and asking when it was his turn. It was at this point too that I noticed his crowbar was actually real and not a prop. It started to make me a bit nervous the way that he was swinging it around a bit. I told him that I'd be able to help him in a minute and to go and wait outside. Well, he's outside and he starts sitting down at the bench and folding over on himself, sort of nodding off and snapping back up and moving around. I'm not stupid and I know that he's on drugs, but it was just me, him, and the single mum and her 2 children. I stopped paying attention to my editing and I started paying attention to him a bit. I could tell that he was starting to make this family feel uncomfortable. He started waving around the crowbar in a dangerous way too. I was concerned about the glass and my safety. He walked back into the studio a few times and wasn't taking no for an answer now, continually barging into the studio and asking, "When are you going to take my picture?" with this horrifying dead look. I finally got done editing the family's photos and I was practically shaking at the checkout. The mum that I was working with tuned into the situation pretty quickly as well. The guy kept looking over the computer and trying to see her photos. She loudly asked, "Can I help you?" To which the guy just sort of responded, rambling more about how he was supposed to be taking pictures. She whispered over to me, but I was sure that he could still hear it, and she asked me if I was okay. I took out their appointment paper and said out loud something about the price and wrote on the paper that he wasn't going away and that my manager was supposed to be on the way to help. At this point, it had been about an hour and a half since my co-workers left, by the way. She seemed still on edge, but we went through with her transaction. At this point, I felt completely paralyzed. I was one card swipe away from being alone in this tiny studio with this crazy drugged-out man, with a real metal crowbar, no less. I went to scan her card on our studio card scanning machine, and by the grace of God, her card wasn't working on our local system. If the card won't scan on the local system, we have to reprint the transaction and check out a regular register inside the retail store. And I saw this moment as an out. I grabbed the new printed paper and walked her over to the registers at our salon. The second that I was out of the man's eyesight, I burst into tears, explaining what happened to one of the salon guys. He immediately pages the manager over our phone, and they asked me if I'd like to wait in the break room or the salon. I would have had to have walked past this man to go to the break room, so I just stayed put there in the salon. The mum who was helping me throughout the whole experience told me afterwards that there was no way that she was going to leave me alone with him no matter what. That was very reassuring to me, and I was very grateful for it. I had to wait it out for them to kick him out, but the manager got another guy and they both went to confront him. After about 15 minutes of no words, I peeked out to see if the guy had left the studio yet, and he was gone. All I can say is thank God that I didn't have any other appointments that night, but I still had to sit alone in that studio the rest of the night, and every time the elevator went off, it startled me a bit for sure. It took a while to recover from that, and I still get a bit uneasy working alone sometimes. I think the scariest part of it all is what I didn't see, because about 45 minutes later, the manager of the store came by and checked in on me. I asked him about the guy, naturally, and how kicking him out went, and he proceeded to tell me that this man became absolutely furious, causing a complete scene, threw his crowbar to the ground near the manager, and after getting more security over to help, they were successfully able to escort him out. I was supposed to wait outside for an Uber after work that day, but instead I decided to wait in the studio, and I got a ride home from my mum. So for some context, I, a 30-year-old female, work at a warehouse from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., and my commute is about 30 to 40 minutes, depending on traffic. Usually after work, I stop at a grocery store, just to get some stuff for dinner or snacks for my kids or whatever. My brother is one of the managers in the morning shift, and there's 2 other co-workers with him. At the time of the morning, they're working on produce, which is in the back part of the store, where there's a swing door with 2 large windows, so sometimes I'll tap on the window and say hi to them and go on about my day. Anyway, about 3 months ago, I had to go on an LOA due to personal reasons, and I was supposed to return to work a week ago, but my return to work paperwork is still pending. I never told anyone at work that I was returning, since they're not the ones that deal with it, and It's a whole different department that's in a different state, but last night I got a message from a team leader telling me that she was reaching out to me to let me know that she understood my intentions on returning back to work. I thought that this was a bit weird because, well, my understanding is that they can't reach out to ask questions if you're on medical leave. I just texted her back that my paperwork was pending and that the department in charge would reach out to her soon, and she said thank you and asked if I had forgotten the doctor's paperwork. I was confused and told her that I would reach out to the LOA department. I went to bed at around 5 a.m. and a coworker messaged me asking me why I left earlier. I thought that she had sent the message to the wrong person, so I ignored it and tried to go back to bed. 30 minutes afterward, my friend or coworker texted me saying, "Hey, I heard you came back to work today but left." I replied, "No, I haven't returned to work yet. Who told you that?" At this time, I thought that it was probably somebody that looked like me, but she replied with Anna told me that she saw you and that you were walking to the office. Now, the thing is that we have to scan a key to go in, but since I'm on LOA, even if I return to work, I wouldn't be able to use it for like 2 weeks, which is the time that it takes them to have all of the information in the system again. On Sundays, there are only 20 people compared to the 200 plus Monday to Friday, so everyone knows each other pretty well there. I found out that the reason the team leader messaged me was because she apparently saw me go to the office and leave. The 2 other coworkers that messaged me thought that they saw me too, but at a different time, and one of them saw me go into the office as well, looking around and heading back to the parking lot. It was weird, but I convinced myself that maybe it was somebody else. Well, my brother texted me about an hour later asking if I was just there by the onion table and asked me why I didn't say hi today. I told him that I was still laying down and that I wasn't back at work yet, so I wouldn't be there this early right now. He genuinely thought that I was messing with him too, since I told him that I was returning to work last week, but I had forgotten that I'd never told him about the delay. He told me that all 3 of them saw me though by the onion table and that I just looked straight ahead and kept walking. He messaged me at 6:20, which is the time that I would normally be there after getting off of work, which means that 6 different people saw me at separate times in different places, doing a routine that I usually do, while I was definitely home the whole time. I started feeling a bit panicked by this, and I called my mum to try and calm down, but I just really cannot stop thinking about it, especially since, like I said, there's no way that somebody can get into that office, even if it was me, without all the details and the card and everything. Honestly, I have no idea what's going on, but it's really starting to freak me out. I worked as an EMT security at a very large facility with multiple apartments, restaurants, shops, etc. As security, we're also in charge of any fire and life safety, which included checking eye wash stations. It involves turning on the water for about 5 minutes, testing the water temperature, and signing off the tag. I worked the night shift and typically would do the kitchens around 3 in the morning because no one was there. There was one particular kitchen though that I hated doing because I always had the feeling of being watched there, which was so much worse when all the lights in the campus were off. When doing foot patrols, I always felt someone was standing at the entryways watching me throughout that building. To add some context, earlier in the night, my coworker was showing me his new shoes that he had gotten and was excited for our nightly patrols to wear them in and all that. Now, during our interior patrols, we normally drop everyone off at a different part of the campus since it's so large to get it done quicker. I entered the kitchen and turned on my phone flashlight to see the eye wash station. I turned it on and waited a few minutes. I then turned it off and started filling out the tag. And while writing in the date, I heard footsteps and saw legs and shoes, maybe about 2 feet away from me, out of my peripheral. They looked like my friend's new shoes, so instead of glancing up, I sort of giggled and said, "Wow, you really are trying to break them in. How did you finish your building so quickly?" After no response, I quickly looked up and I saw no one there. My heart sank pretty quickly, and I then heard my friend call out over the radio that he had cleared his building and was into the next one, way across the campus, mind you. I did do a quick walk through the kitchen and I found no one there, which really freaked me out. That was about 5 years ago now, and I still remember it so vividly. I tried to tell myself that I was just tired, but I've heard so many co-workers tell stories about that building that, really, I'm not so sure anymore. For as long as I can remember, I've had vivid dreams about UFOs. They come and they go, sometimes disappearing for months, even years, but when they return, they're intense, more real than dreams should be. My house is surrounded by a forest, and in these dreams, the lights always appear above the treetops, silently hovering before descending closer. Recently, the dreams have become more frequent, and the details sharper, almost as if they're trying to tell me something. The lights move in strange, impossible ways, darting at incredible speeds, stopping suddenly, and then hovering without a sound. There's an overwhelming silence in the dreams as well, suffocating and heavy. Even though I don't always see figures, I feel them watching from behind the light. These dreams don't feel random, they feel deliberate, like something is trying to reach me. Since childhood, I've dealt with sleep paralysis, which often accompanies these experiences, but not always. When it happens, I wake up fully aware but completely paralyzed, unable to move or even cry for help. A crushing weight presses on my chest, and shadows gather around me, short, dark figures standing just at the edge of my vision. Sometimes they shift slightly, as if they're whispering among themselves. Other times, glowing red and orange orbs appear, about the size of a volleyball, hovering in my room. They pulse with an eerie energy before disappearing as quickly as they'd arrived. When the paralysis finally breaks, I often wake up screaming, gasping for air. My wife knows this well. She's had to shake me awake many times, trying to calm me down while I catch my breath. Our house has been the site of countless strange phenomena over the years too. Flickering lights, objects moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of being watched in certain rooms. One time we even received a strange voicemail message. That recording had no missed call attached to it, and went straight to voicemail. Just an unidentifiable voice whispering in a language that we couldn't understand. We are a large family, 5 children, 2 dogs, 5 cats, and 5 chickens. Life in our home is always full of energy and activity. None of my kids had ever had any complaints about any phenomena, but sometimes the animals do behave strangely. Like, for instance, the dogs refuse to enter certain areas of the house for no reason, while the cat sits still for long periods, staring into empty corners as if watching something only they can see. It's nothing overtly alarming, but just enough to make us wonder if they're sensing something invisible. Some of these strange events have been caught on video too, while others have been only witnessed. Doors opening on their own, strange flashes of light in dark rooms, and orbs floating through the air as well at times. Things recently took a more disturbing turn. You see, on December 24th of 2024, during breakfast, my wife noticed something odd on our front door security camera. Intrigued, we checked the footage. Both the front door camera and a wide-angle camera on the corner of the house captured the same event, a glowing orb moving across the yard. It wasn't faint or ambiguous. You can even see the orb reflecting off of my car near the end of the footage. It triggered our motion activity lights as it passed by, and it was in the middle of the night, around -15°C. There were no insects, no birds, no reasonable explanation for it. Then, on January 17th of 2025, our backyard camera recorded something even stranger. A shadow passed over the snow-covered ground, briefly blocking the moonlight. It rotated steadily above my house, but there was no visible source, nothing in the sky or around the house that could have cast it. Only a few days later, on January 21st, our side doorbell camera captured another mysterious orb. This one moved with purpose, but not like the dust or the debris that you normally see. Something gliding steadily through the air. It looked disturbingly similar to what we had seen on December 24th, raising more questions than answers. My wife, she's practical, a down-to-earth person. She's never believed in UFOs or the paranormal, always the rational one in our relationship, to be honest. But after living through years of strange occurrences and now even witnessing these recent events on camera, even she cannot explain what's happening. The videos really do speak for themselves. Something unusual is happening around our home, something that feels connected to my experiences. These strange encounters aren't new to me, that's for sure. They've been with me since childhood, in fact, sparking a lifelong fascination with the paranormal. For nearly 10 years, I traveled across Canada and the United States in search for answers, visiting places known for strange phenomena and chasing the unexplained. It became a part of my life, in fact, a relentless pursuit for the meaning in the chaos. But something changed along the way. The activity at home, it began to intensify after each trip, almost like I was bringing something back with me. Every time I returned, the strange phenomena grew worse, more unexplainable sounds, more objects moving, an overwhelming sense of being watched all the time now. It became too much in the end. And so, after 10 years, I quit cold turkey, cutting myself off from the paranormal field entirely. The activity at home slowed down after that as well, though it never truly stopped. It felt like whatever had followed me had lost interest, or at least for a while. To be clear as well, I'm not claiming to know what any of this means. I'm not saying that I've been abducted, nor am I trying to convince anyone of anything. But when I piece everything together, the vivid UFO dreams, the sleep paralysis with shadow figures and glowing orbs, the strange voicemail message, the videos that we've captured over the years, and the recent sightings, it's really, really hard to ignore the connection now. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe it's just in my mind, and my mind is weaving patterns where there are none. But sometimes, late at night, when I wake up and feel that heavy, lingering presence in the room, I cannot help but wonder if something is watching. Something that doesn't need to come often, because it already knows I'm here. This is a bit of a long story, and there's a few things that I need to explain first, so please bear with me. So I wouldn't call myself a medium or anything of that nature, but my whole life I have felt like I have seen things and been connected to something that just never felt right. I've always had odd paranormal experiences that nobody else has had or seen around me. Both my parents had unexplainable feelings and premonitions. I don't particularly believe in that, and would usually just push it off to everyone as just being crazy. Honestly, I have started to think that I was or am crazy. My mother used to see things that would come true as well, but not like see the future type thing, but see things that would have significance to events yet to come. For an example, one night after moving into her house, she had several dreams of snakes, visions of snakes everywhere, and she mentioned it to me, but I thought that she was just crazy. Nights later, her fiancé at the time got up to use the bathroom and stepped on something squishy. He flipped the lights on to discover a snake. They called animal control, only to discover an infestation of snakes in the attic. My mum was very artistic and would draw things, and always talked about visions of apples and would always tell me, "Don't bite the apple." She would reference Snow White biting the apple and going into a deep sleep, Eve biting the apple, etc. Close to her passing, she made this reference a lot as well. Oddly enough, my mum was hospitalized and went into a coma where she passed away a month after being in the coma. It freaked me out, honestly, and I'm sure you're probably thinking that it was just chance and that she died the same way that she kept mentioning. And honestly, that's what I thought too. My great-grandmother was in the hospital close to her death and said that my great-grandfather had been visiting her. He passed away years prior, and she said that he was coming to get her, allegedly. And days later, she passed. My father fell to his knees one day and said that he felt in his chest that something was wrong with our cousin. Shortly after, he got a phone call saying that he had been killed in a car accident. Now, to give a few references of these unexplainable events that have happened to me, I'm going to drop a few stories, and honestly, I would like to see what you guys think about it. Is it all in my head, or could there be a slight chance that maybe I'm not crazy? So, when I was a toddler, probably 3 or so, my mum and I were driving as we passed a wreck on the road. A semi had crashed a car and the vehicle was destroyed as it was under the semi. The vehicle was so bad that you couldn't tell the make or the model barely. As we passed by, I started shouting at my mum that it was my aunt, and my body just knew this, and I kept saying it over and over again. My mother reassured me that it wasn't, as you couldn't see the person trapped under nor tell the vehicle at all. We arrived at my grandmother's house, where we received a call saying that my aunt had been in a wreck and had went under that semi, and the woman trapped under was in fact her. Another time, when I was around 10 or 11, I went to visit some friends, family with them on a family trip in upstate New York. They lived down a back street, but all close by to each other in what felt like a family compound, I guess you could say. The first few days felt completely fine as well. But there was one night where we were all gathered outside. I believe that they were having a bonfire outside when all started telling ghost stories. As I was 11 or so, of course their goal was to try and scare me, which ultimately didn't work. And as the night progressed, I started hearing things in the surrounding woods, and then noticed a figure in the upstairs window looking down on everyone. I pointed it out, and when everyone came to look, as you would expect, nobody was there. I thought that it might have been a cruel prank until I realized that everyone was accounted for outside. For what felt like an eternity, I kept thinking about the figure in the back of my head as my thoughts raced. I saw the figure once again and made a slight comment about it, and at this point, the family sort of seemed annoyed that I kept bringing up something that just wasn't there. Later on in the night, my friend who traveled with me pulled me to the side and let me know that she did in fact see something as well, but was afraid that no one would believe her as they didn't believe me. Well, we left that next day, but the eerie feeling certainly remained. Now, I'm sure I know what you're thinking. Scary stories plus a child's active imagination equals seeing things that aren't real. However, just indulge me and keep listening. So on February 14th of 2014, I was in middle school. It was Valentine's Day and it was a Friday night before the weekend. That morning, my teacher handed out a word scramble for fun where you make as many words with the letters from the words you're given, like the game Anagrams. The words were Happy Valentine's Day. The first word that I came up with was death, followed by die. I kept circling back to those words and they repeated in my head over and over. The school day ended, and as I was walking home, my house was surrounded by ambulances and my grandfather walked to the bus stop and said that something had happened and we would talk about it later. To make a long story short, my stepfather had unfortunately died in his sleep from conjunctive heart failure. I moved from that house to live with another family member after his death, and when I turned 14, my great-aunt's boyfriend at the time had a heart attack and died too. They had been together for a long time, but he never married her, and he was often cold towards everyone in the family. And although they were together for a long time, he just refused to marry her. Several years prior, that was the last time that I had spoken to them, as my family were not close. and I mentioned the fact that they weren't married and asked why that was. To be fair, children have no filter and they just say whatever they think in that moment, right? But in that moment, I could feel the mood change, and the tension could be cut with a knife, and his energy just felt sinister, like his spirit was just evil, almost as if he was surrounded by darkness. I hadn't spoken to them since that moment until I found out that he had passed away. My family consoled my great aunt, and we all helped her pack the house up to get ready to move in with us, as she could no longer stay in that house. We finished packing up her house within about 2 days, and towards the end, my aunt pulled me aside and let me know how thankful she was that I was there, but told me that when her boyfriend was having his heart attack, he pulled her in and, in a sinister tone, told her, "If something happens to me, do not let your great-nephew in this house." Hearing that only caused me to have an off feeling while we were finishing up, but days after she moved into our home, I was sleeping when what felt like sleep paralysis started to kick in. I laid in my bed feeling helpless when I saw a figure creep over me, screaming at me, and I will never forget the words it said, "Get out." It screamed this at me, shaking me, and I just laid there still. It then raised its hand at me and struck me in the face. I sat up quickly out of my sleep in a state of shock and in fear, thinking that I had just had the worst nightmare I'd ever had. But it was then that I noticed that my face was burning from what I thought was just a dream, but when I touched it, I noticed that it was wet. I rushed to the bathroom, noticing that there was now a gash on my face and blood was dripping down. I never said anything because at the time my other family member that I lived with was having schizophrenic hallucinations and severe PTSD and being in the military and all that. She had said that she would see shadow figures, and I always assumed that she was just having another episode. I didn't want to trigger another episode, so I created a rational explanation and I just kept it to myself. But not long after that, I moved, and the house that we moved into was really nice. It was big enough for all of us and felt like a good fit. And during the showing of the house, the basement door had a lock on it. We were unable to view it at the time, but we were assured that it was nothing, and when we moved in, we had the lock cut, and to our disbelief, there was a letter and a pentagram painted in black on the wall. The letter stated that the previous tenant was involved in some sketchy activities like witchcraft, and she said that she went too far and opened something that she couldn't close, thus the move. Nobody really thought anything of it, to be honest, as we all had no belief in anything like that, and plus I had suppressed those previous experiences as I rationalized them to just being an overly active imagination. Time went by and we painted the wall eventually, but that pentagram just kept seeping through every time that we painted it, so in the end, well, we just sort of left it alone. There were often times, though, when we would hear things through the night, such as creaking, cabinets closing, footsteps running through the house, but we were a big house, so we always rationalized it. But at night, I distinctly remember hearing a kid's giggle and footsteps running through the hallway. Cabinets started slamming often, pictures would fall off the wall spontaneously. It got so bad that we ended up actually calling a priest out and asked him to bless the house. Well, we didn't mention the pentagram, and when he walked in, he walked straight down the stairs as if he was drawn straight to it. He blessed the house, and after that, we didn't have anything bad happen for a while. I was around 16 at that time when everyone decided to take a weekend family getaway, but unfortunately I had to work that weekend as my job only allowed me to work weekends due to school and all that, so I had to stay home. I came home one day and I suddenly had a cold, eerie feeling walking into that house, as I was a victim of home invasions when I was younger, so since then I've always been extremely paranoid and on edge, but this was way more than usual. We had several dogs and we lived pretty secluded, with neighbors just close enough if something happened you could call on them, but far enough that if we wanted privacy, we definitely had it. So I wasn't quite as anxious as I would normally be, but that eerie feeling just never left. I decided to call it a night eventually, and my dog followed me to bed. I was laying there tossing and turning for probably 15 to 20 minutes when I noticed that one corner of my room looked extremely dark, way darker than normal. And I mean, the bedroom window normally casted a shadow in that corner, but this time it was like pitch black, like I couldn't see through it at all. My dog peered her head up and faced the corner as well, and then she started growling. I tried to shush her, assuming that it was nothing, except she started growling louder and louder. The hair on her body stuck up, and now she was snarling. It looked like she had an extreme case of rabies almost, and I had never seen her like that, growling, barking, and even foaming at the mouth at the edge of my bed. I kept trying to calm her down when she lunged at the corner, barking as if she saw an intruder or something. I quickly turned the lights on, and the shadows in the room were filled with light, and she calmed down shortly afterward. I convinced myself that it was nothing, and I tried to go back to sleep. I laid back down, only to awake to the sound of her growling as she was before in the corner of the room. And it was then that I grabbed my pillow and I headed out to my car to sleep there for the night. But weirdly, as I looked back to my bedroom window, it was completely dark, and my stomach dropped from a feeling that is really difficult to explain. I never stayed in that house alone again after that. I refused to. And I haven't had anything like that happen for a while, as I live in an apartment with other people now. But every now and then I feel like I'm being watched. I have nightmares sometimes and sit up in the middle of the night in the darkness with unexplained fear. Honestly, I feel like I'm a pretty normal person. I guess anyway, with just some unexplainable things that have happened that I keep suppressing. But what do you guys think? Do you think that it's all in my head? I find myself trying to still rationalize everything with nobody to turn to who would believe me, or who wouldn't think that I needed to be locked up in an asylum. Hence, this is why I'm here with all of you guys. So again, what do you guys think? So I started this job about a month ago. I'm an overnight security officer in one of multiple buildings on a large campus. I signed an NDA, so I really cannot be more specific to potentially identify my client. But I started my job training on first shift, and I'll admit that I was skeptical when I started hearing the stories. Things moving, doors opening and closing, actual full-bodied apparitions in the middle of the day, and a little girl that throws things in one of the older buildings, stuff of that nature. I'm usually pretty sensitive to the paranormal, having experienced it often growing up. I've experienced many unexplainable things, but the buildings I trained in just didn't feel threatening, so I just dismissed it. I've been working my regular shift for 2 weeks now, and on my first day on third shift, I was checking a bathroom when a shadow man leaned out and glared at me as the door shut. Instantly, I felt paralyzed, and I no longer felt safe. But I tried to brush it off and told myself that it should be okay. I mean, I need this job. It's the only place in my area that pays a livable wage. I put up with every whisper, every bang, every uneasy feeling of danger as I walked through the building, and I told myself that it's just an adjustment period. We're new to each other and it should calm down with time. Yesterday, I learned that my building specifically was built on top of a historical graveyard, specifically a graveyard for slaves and their descendants. When the property was bought by my client, the bodies were exhumed and moved across the street, but their original resting place, that is right under my feet every night when I go to work. Tonight I was checking the emergency exits, which are enclosed in a stairwell. I checked the door was secure and there were no hazards. Then I tried to re-enter the building from the stairwell and the door was held tight. I would open it just enough to see that No one was there on the other side, and it would slam shut again. A few minutes after that, I finally got out of the stairwell and I entered a loading area and was immediately confronted by a massive shadow figure-looking hat man, at least 7 feet tall, and was watching me. I took a deep breath and I just kept moving. Funnily enough, tonight was probably the least threatened that I've felt since starting working nights here. But anyway, I have a friend on day shift in my building, and before I went into work last night, she told me that the activity yesterday was wild. She warned me that she had been touched on the staircase and that there had been a lot of voices. She told me to be careful around the elevator and emergency exits because she was getting bad vibes, as she called it. Honestly, I should have listened too. My first patrol was eerily quiet. At this point, I'm used to some kind of noise, a humming or a tapping at least, talking and doors opening and closing at most. But my first hour at work was completely silent. My second patrol is when the shadows started moving, stretching and following me. The first floor, which I previously thought was safe, was starting to feel ominous all of a sudden, and everything stayed somewhat calm until midnight. That was when I started getting touched. Being touched, that had never happened before, and I liked it even less that it was on my shoulders and head that were being targeted. I wear my hair in a long braid to keep it out of the way, and last night, it was tugged on multiple times. And unlike my friend, they didn't keep the touches in the stairwell. They followed me in and out of the rooms, and I could hear angry muttering the entire time. I tried talking to them. I asked them to back off a little bit. I just wanted to do my job, and it's Friday anyway. I'll be gone for 2 days after this. I tried to kindly explain why I had to check everything, but the activity just got worse. What ended up being my last patrol at 4 a.m. though was definitely the scariest. I should have known better as well. I should have paid closer attention. On the previously safe first floor, I could hear footsteps following me. Then I checked the second bathroom. I did my ritual, knock twice, hold the door for 5 to 10 seconds, announce myself, and then enter. But when I entered, a massive shadow was stood in the back corner, and I could tell that it did not want me there. I could feel its glare and the raw aggression rolling through the air from it. This was so much worse than anything I'd experienced yet. I was shaky and I stood still in place for a moment. So I apologized but explained that I needed to check the bathroom. It disappeared suddenly and I excused myself to continue my patrol. On the third floor, the door to the staircase was held shut again. They wouldn't let me back in the building for almost 5 minutes. It was a battle to even get in there. I tried walking down, but the lower level doors were also held firm. I wanted to respect their wishes, but I also needed to finish my patrol. Finally, I'm able to go to the second floor, and immediately, I felt terrified as the elevator door opened. The floor felt somehow impossibly dark. I walked out, and what was silence exploded into noise. I could hear banging on the walls, and I took a deep breath. I needed to finish this patrol. So, like the idiot I am, I kept going, and my braid was pulled as I moved to go into the central fire riser, the system that feeds the water to overhead sprinklers. But I still had longer to go. I round the corner from the storage quad to go down the main hallway, and the light that doesn't come on until I'm on the other side of the hallway turns on suddenly. And that was when dread filled my gut. I keep going. I make it to the other end undisturbed. As I approach the first bathroom on that side, I hear a creaking sound though. Initially I dismiss it. There's a roof access nearby I have to check, and it probably came from there after all. I do my checks and I notice that shadows are congregating around the elevator now. I walk up the small, solid concrete stairs to check the roof access, and everything seems okay. I step back inside and the concrete seems to shake under me slightly. which was definitely unnerving, but this is literally the last part of my patrol, so I was like, it's fine, I'll just get it over and done with. I'll go back to the office, radio in a complete patrol, and it should be fine. And I got into the elevator. The elevator moved maybe a foot before it happened. A loud bang, and I screamed as it fell. The door didn't open. I was dazed and afraid, and for some reason I didn't radio in for backup right that second. I was panicked, I guess, and dumb, I know that, and so I pressed another button. But the door opened, and I was somehow safely on the ground floor. Well, I got out as quickly as I could, and I went to my office to call it in. I would later learn after I got home that my dog had started freaking out at about the same time as I started my patrol on the second floor. She had scared my family in her desperation to get out, and honestly, I'm just really scared now. I know that I'm not safe there. I don't want to just walk away, but I'm actively searching for any kind of protection that I can get, and I will definitely be using the staircases from now on. So I was maybe 9 to 10 years old, and we had just moved to a more islandish neighborhood in West Virginia, right over a massive bridge. We were moving in with some close family friends and their family. The house was relatively big with at least 4 bedrooms, including the office, a basement, 2 bathrooms, and an attic and walk-in closet. In order to get to our room, we had to walk through the upstairs bathroom, then through the walk-in closet, and on the other side of our room was another door that connected to another bedroom. When we first moved in, we were told that the previous owners, or tenants, that they practiced voodoo, although I'm not sure what exactly it was, to be honest. But whatever it was, there were tons of dolls in the house, ranging from baby dolls to just the heads and hanging Barbies, all that. Outside of the room that me and my mother occupied were 4 pencils with yarn heads on them. They were sort of strapped outside the door, and written on each pencil was a name. I don't remember the names, but we all advised our family friends not to remove them. It felt wrong to us, I suppose, but he did anyways, and our bedroom door didn't stay shut for whatever reason. At the time, I was still super small, so I still sat on a full car seat, and we used the car seat to sort of keep the door cracked instead of wide open. And one particular night, all the adults except for 2 and their 3 to 4-year-old child, they went out to a local bar. I stayed back with my iPad watching it in our room. I accidentally turned off my iPad, and at that time I didn't know the password to get back in. So I tried to turn the TV on, but that didn't work, so I was just sort of left there in silence with my toys. I remember feeling how quiet it was. Like, you know that it shouldn't be as quiet as it was. Maybe 10 minutes or so goes by, and for no good reason I can think of, my door just suddenly flies wide open, even with the car seat still in front of it. I remember breaking down in tears over it, and honestly, when I think about it, it still shakes me a bit. I was told the toddler probably used that bathroom and pushed the door open, but with how fast it was, I would have seen them running away or something. I have had other encounters in that house after that, ranging from my toys not being where I left them and not being able to shower with the frosted glass doors, as I could vividly see a figure outside of them that wasn't there. But we moved shortly after, only a couple of months, as things between the family got abusive and weird, and so thankfully I didn't have to put up with it for too long. Growing up, I didn't know if spirits or ghosts were real. My mind was open to the idea, but I had never experienced anything to believe it. Anyways, I was 23 when I first moved out of home to my first apartment. I'm 28 now, so this was some time back. I will say that living there for the most part was pretty normal, but on a couple of occasions, there were some moments that sent chills right down my spine. The first time, I was chilling with my lady friend. We were just laying on my couch watching a movie or something, The kitchen was small, so looking at the TV, you can see the whole kitchen. I had a cheap trash can where the top lid spins, so to dispose the trash, you can just throw it in. We were just chilling, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the lid spin a few times, as if someone slapped it to make it spin. I noticed it, but I didn't say anything. My lady friend then asks me like 10 seconds later if I saw that. I was like, holy cow, I wasn't tripping. We investigated the trash and nothing. At first I thought maybe a rat jumped onto it or something. I mean, we didn't have a rat problem, but I had no idea what else could have done that. In short, we had no idea what the heck it was, and we were quite shook for a while. The second moment, though, it genuinely made my heart sink, and I've never felt that feeling ever since then. So my girlfriend, she would come over a lot. This was after my lady friend. I'm not a cheater or anything, but she, among a few of my other friends, always told me that my apartment had a bad vibe to it. Like the energy in there was sort of dark. I didn't think much about it. But we had these 2 stuffed animals that we won at a claw machine at our local arcade. After some time of her feeling uneasy, for some reason we both concluded that those stuffed animals just gave off bad vibes. She removed them off the bookshelf and put them in my kitchen cabinet before I left for work that day, just to put them away for the time being. Keep in mind, I dropped her off at her house and she didn't have a key to the apartment, and I always double-locked it. Fast forward a bit, I get back from work and decide to take a nap. I laid on my couch, and the way that I was laying, the bookshelf was in front of me a bit to the left side of the wall. At the time, I was having a lot of sleep paralysis. I still do from time to time, but in hindsight, I did experience a lot of sleep paralysis in that apartment for some reason. So of course, I'm waking up in sleep paralysis mode. My eyes open, unable to move. I look, and all I see are those 2 stuffed animals sitting in the exact spot that they were at. My first thoughts were, what the heck? How the heck did those get back on there? It was impossible for those things to get back on that shelf, unless they walked back there, which obviously is impossible. Or is it? My heart sank into my gut. I felt my skin crawl, and that feeling of unease just took over my body. After I was finally able to move, I called her and asked if she put them back before we left the apartment, and she swore up and down that she didn't. She couldn't believe what I was telling her, as we were both in disbelief. I disposed of those 2 stuffed animals in the big trash, this time certain that they would never pop back up again. Now, I still consider myself a skeptic, as I never again had any other experiences with what I believe was paranormal. But the couple of times that I did, it was at those apartments. I actually had a friend who grew up in them, and she told me that they were definitely haunted. She's seen and heard things there too, but anyway. I should have probably mentioned too that at one point my girlfriend claimed that she one time saw a big shadow figure above me. It was allegedly in the corner of the ceiling, and I vividly remember her looking up too and telling me too. Of course, when I turned around, there was nothing there, but I did feel my skin crawl a bit after she told me that. She used to stay there when I went off to work as well, and always told me that she just always felt like she was being watched. It was the main reason that I started dropping her off back at her house when I would leave for work. So my coworker came into work today and told me about her night. She was in bed, and both her and her significant other smelled burning and heard crackling around 2 a.m. They both got out of bed to check it out. They figured it was the bug zapper outside. They went to turn it off and exited to the porch, where they both heard a consistent bark from the field below. This field had no nearby houses or anything, and it's a bit of a trek to even get up their driveway. The bark was weird, but sounded like a normal dog aside from the fact that it was just consistent, almost rhythmic in fact. They decided to go ahead and check out the field. They took her car down, and as soon as the engine was cut, there was a pit all of a sudden in their stomachs. Exiting the car, it sounded like the bark was so far away now that even though they were right on top of it before, it just made no sense. It hadn't have seemed to have changed much, but it didn't sound as close as it did when they were in the house. My coworker decided that it wasn't a good idea to leave her child alone in the house for too long, and so in the end she went back. About a half an hour passed, and the dog is still consistently barking in the field. Significant other decides to go back and make sure that there isn't a dog in the ditch or something. She decided to call him so he wasn't just out there completely alone. Once he got back there, he started walking into the field trying to find it, the pit still in his stomach the whole time. He decided not to call out, but to just look instead. He left strapped just in case as well, by the way. The entire time my coworker listened on the phone. The barking grew more intense and the dog went crazy as it had obviously seen the light from his phone or something. The weirdest thing though was that he saw nothing, but the barking continued to grow louder until he must have been right on top of it. She had commented at one point that it was so deafening it sounded like the dog itself was holding the phone. But then, all of a sudden, just dead silence. No running, no barking, no breathing, nothing. No dog found or anything. She messaged her father who lives close by, and he had heard the barking too, but obviously didn't go to investigate. She had her father ask the person who owns the property to go and check out where they had heard what was going on too the next day. Nothing found so far, and it's been raining there, so there should be tracks. And I also decided to ask them if it sounded like a fox or a coyote or anything. They lived down there long enough to distinguish between the two, and this sounded too much like a bloodhound to be anything else. So if you guys have any more ideas, then I would love to hear them. For reference, we're in Ohio, so we're in Appalachia, and I know the place has a bit of a bad reputation for stuff like this, but yeah, I hope that's helpful. So my boyfriend and I live in a small neighborhood. Our house faces a densely wooded riverfront. Our street isn't very busy. It's dark and there isn't a park in the woods or anything, so not many people go down there, much less the middle of the night. But last night at around midnight, my boyfriend was sitting on our front porch smoking a cigarette when he heard a weird voice in the distance. It was clearly speaking a different language, and the only way that he could describe it was it sounded like Mickey Mouse. He thought that it was just some kids messing around with him, but as he listened closely, he noticed that it was just one voice talking and laughing. It wasn't talking to anyone except itself, whatever or whoever it was. It was far enough off in the distance that my boyfriend felt comfortable listening, until it started whistling an eerie song that he couldn't place, and as it whistled, it began to grow closer. He ran inside and locked all the doors and the windows. He tried waking me up, but I get up at like 5 a.m. every morning for work and I sleep like a rock. Hearing about it though, when I woke up to get a drink of water, really gave me the heebie-jeebies. My first thought was maybe some crackhead tweaking out in the woods perhaps, but of course my brain immediately goes to cryptids. I can't help it. But what do you think? I've been combing the internet for hours this morning, trying to find out legends and myths about this, but I haven't had much luck, so if you know anything, then please do give me some ideas. So I was alone once on a Friday evening during summer in my house around maybe 2013 to 2016. I really don't remember the exact year, but I was still in my early teens at this time as well. And anyways, usually on Fridays, I would go with my parents along with my sister to help them out at their workplace. But well, this Friday, they went only with my sister and I was left alone that day at the house. I was playing Minecraft on my old PC inside my bedroom with my headset on when suddenly I hear footsteps, like someone was rubbing their feet against the carpet in the living room, which is right next to my bedroom. I had the volume really low, so I heard it loud and clear, even through my headphones. I turn my head and look at my door, puzzled and thinking if my parents had come back to get something, or maybe my bigger brother had come to the house to grab stuff. I get up from my chair and open my door, but I don't see anyone. The lights are on in the living room, but nobody is there. I go to the front door and the back door. Both are locked. The windows are locked too. I check the driveway and the front gate, and they're closed with no cars there. I end up going to every room and turn on the lights and check every corner, even the closet, but there was nothing. Nothing had been moved or changed. So I go to call my mum and ask her if she had been inside the house. She said no, that they were already at work, and suggested that it might have been my brother, but I told her that he hadn't been here either, and I didn't hear a car pull up or anything, so she just says that I was probably just hearing things and just to make sure everything is locked. I hang up and triple check everything is locked and walk back to my room, absolutely creeped out now. I lock the bedroom door and leave the lights on in my room. I definitely turned up the headphones volume too after that and continued to play, albeit creeped out, till my parents came back from work. To this day, it still really creeps me out thinking about it, especially because that house and property in general has had a history of paranormal activity on it. All of my family, even my skeptic brother and dad, have seen or heard things at least. Even my brother's ex-girlfriend has said that she would see or hear things in the house and in the back garage as well. We still live there, but since blessing the house, most of the activity seems to have gone away, which I'm thankful for, but still, this house still has me on edge sometimes, and I don't like that. In 2019, I was 25 and struggling financially. I asked my mum if I could take one of her rooms in order to pay less rent. I moved in, and then soon after I asked my girlfriend to move in with me to help pay rent. It was a 4-bedroom house with a studio attached in the back with a small family. On one half of our house was my mum in the master bedroom with one of my twin sisters, Carla, who was 13. It was a 4-bedroom house with a studio attached in the back with a small family. On one half of our house was my mother in the master bedroom with one of my twin sisters, Carla, who was 13. In the other room was a man who was renting a room. On the other half of the home was my sister, Janet, 19, with her baby daughter, and my other twin sister, Angela, 13. Then finally, myself and my girlfriend, Kylie. Myself and my girlfriend, aside from some wine or mixed drinks on rare occasions, are completely sober. We're the type to just stay home and watch movies, really. My Catholic family was fairly poor growing up, and so I like to think of ourselves as just regular hardworking people. Most importantly, though, we like to think of ourselves as rational. We don't really deal with much nonsense. No previous strange occurrences in any of our lives, and my girlfriend is also a Christian. Now, one night at around 8 p.m., myself and my girlfriend were in bed, and we were alarmed to hear the most heavy footsteps that you could imagine on the roof. It sounded like a big man with big boots, and it was very clearly going from corner to corner above our room. I got up and went to investigate, but when I did, everything was normal in our house. I went outside expecting to see somebody on our roof, probably the back neighbors, but there was nothing. We asked the people in the back, but they had no clue. Me and my girlfriend and our cat were the only ones that heard it apparently too. I thought that maybe it was someone running away from someone or something, but our roof had that very steep triangle shape to it. Anyway, a few days after, again myself and my girlfriend were on our bed and we heard running above us. This time though, it was quick, light running like a child. This time it was more odd. We went to ask my sisters again, but nothing, which was very strange. Anyway, every so often, we would hear these steps above us. I started believing that we had a person living in our attic, and every time I heard the steps, I'd pop my head in the attic and shine my phone around, but again, nothing. Eventually, I climbed all the way up to search too, but again, there was nobody up there. Nobody else heard them too except me and my girlfriend, and it started getting very frustrating. I have anxiety and have always had trouble sleeping. When I'd hear the steps at night, it'd be very uncomfortable, and when it would wake me up, I'd have trouble falling back asleep. I started getting very angry at the situation, in fact, and I was a competitive boxer at the time, and sleep was pretty urgent for me. Myself and my girlfriend came to the conclusion that this was probably an animal or, who knows, maybe a ghost. Myself and my girlfriend came to the conclusion that this was probably just an animal. One day, though, I was alone in the house and I heard footsteps. At this point, I was pretty ticked off and I perfectly rushed my way up into the attic. I crawled around saying, "Here I am, I'm all by myself. What are you about? What do you want? Show yourself. Do something," etc. But there was nothing. One night, footsteps began at around 2 in the morning. I'm awake now and the stress is high. I start doing research on my phone, animal sounds on roof or walls, etc. Nothing sounded familiar and there was really no help. Ghost making footstep noises, apparently though, equals poltergeist, or noisy spirit in German. I researched the history and they're not ghosts but energies created by us humans allegedly. In the past they believed poltergeists were caused by teenage girls because of their strong emotions, and that for me was a bingo. My home at the time was a war zone of emotions, anger, sadness, cursing, yelling and fighting. Most of the issues were due to my twin sisters. Angela especially at the time was rebelling severely. She started hanging out with some bad kids and drinking and drugging and all that. My mum was strict, so they would fight bad about it, and once they even got into a small fist fight and the police were called. Of course, I'd get involved as well. Angela had very strong emotions. I was battling depression at this time due to being broke, and myself and my mum were bipolar. My sister Carla was clinically diagnosed as bipolar. But while researching, I learned that we could get rid of negative energy by bringing positive energy, like praying or saging your home, etc. Now, eventually, as I was up, my girlfriend woke up as well, and I told her that I heard the footsteps again and couldn't go back to sleep, and I told her about all of the research that I had found. She started doing some research of her own at this point. It was maybe around 15 minutes before 3 a.m. and my girlfriend says out loud, "I'm just waiting for it to be 3 a.m. because apparently that's when spirits are most active or something." I took it as a joke and sort of ignored it. But sure enough, at 3 a.m. on the dot, we heard the most aggressive, chaotic, and sporadic thumping yet. This time it was happening with no pattern, and it was all over our roof. My girlfriend grabbed my shoulder, terrified. I was paralyzed for about 3 seconds because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After coming back to my senses, I picked up my phone and started recording, but unfortunately it was too late. It must have lasted about 4 seconds or so. All I got on my video was my cat freaking out. The video was saved and recorded at 3:01 a.m. officially, and this was the turning point for me. The next day, I went to each of one of my family members one by one, told them what happened and about poltergeists. I also told them about what we had to do to remove this, and I told them that we have to chill out and no more fighting, work on our anger, let's pray at night together, and thankfully they actually all took it pretty seriously. We dialed it down severely, we saged the house, we prayed and read the Bible passages at night sometimes together. I proclaimed at our home that there was no room for negative energy, only positive energy, and we really did a 180 at this point. And amazingly, it actually worked. After some time, very suddenly it just sort of all stopped, not a peep. We never spoke about it as a family again, and I've been known to be one of the more responsible ones of my siblings. Aside from that time being very hard for me emotionally and financially, I have and am doing very well for myself, thankfully. Honestly, too, at the time, I really was the only one of the siblings that would have been able to handle this situation and turn it around, like I actually helped do. So, I'd like to believe that that's the reason why my room was the only ones that heard it. Maybe this occurrence happened in order for my family to be more at peace or something. Myself and Kylie are now married with a daughter. We moved into our current home on December 15th of 2023. When we settled in, we held hands and I proclaimed loudly to make sure that I was heard that in this house, there's no room for negative energy, only positive. My wife did her saging thing too and put oil on the doorways and prayed and all that. And thankfully, so far, so good. Mum and stepdad got married when I was 4. Mum and I moved into the house that my stepdad owned after they got married. It was just the 3 of us and our animals. I'm an only child, and at the time of the story, we had 2 big dogs who lived inside and out. The dogs usually roamed outside at night on the 20 acres that we owned. We lived in that house for about 14 years, and I saw my fair share of creepy stuff, but this story, it definitely sticks out the most. A little bit of background first, though. So, I was around 7. I don't exactly remember the age, but only the present that I got that year. I know that I was old enough to use the bathroom at night alone, but still young enough that my mum usually checked on me to make sure that I got back into bed okay. I also know for sure that it was Christmas Eve. I know this because our tree was always off at night, except for on Christmas Eve. Our house was pretty small, 850 square feet small, but I loved it. When you walked in the front door, you were immediately in the living room. Straight ahead was the hall. In reality, though, it was just a small rectangle that had doors on 3 of the 4 sides. From the living room or the front door, you could see into the bathroom. Heading to the bathroom, you had a closet on the left, a bathroom door, my bedroom door to the right, an empty wall the width of the door, and my parents' bedroom door as well. The kitchen was off of the left of the living room and shared a wall with the bathroom and the closet. It was super cute and just really cozy, and we also had an unfinished basement with the stairs in the living room by the kitchen door to the back porch. Now, I got up to use the bathroom Christmas Eve. I got up from my bed, went out of my bedroom door, and turned the corner into the bathroom. I, of course, being a kid, had to peek at the tree and the presents underneath. I thought that I saw a monster truck at one point. At the time, I was a huge fan and really wanted a remote control one, but I didn't stop to look because I really had to go. After I finished up my business, I got up and looked towards the living room. I really wanted to peek at my presents again before I went back to sleep. We didn't really close the doors in my house growing up unless we had people over, so I could see the front door and the glow of the tree from my seat. I looked back at the toilet to flush, and when I looked back up at the doorway, between the hall and the living room, I saw the silhouette of a boy. He looked about my age from his height, but he had his back to me, so I'm not sure what his face looked like. He was standing in the doorway using his left hand to hold the door frame so that he could lean into the living room on his tiptoes and peek at the presents, I think. In his right hand, he had what looked like like a red sucker or something. His whole body was dark because of the lack of light and the Christmas lights shining behind him. I shuffled to the edge of the bathroom, so I was just inside the doorway. If I had put my arm straight out, I could have actually touched this kid. I'm standing there, about to ask what he's doing, when he slowly drops back down to his flat feet and starts to turn to face me. Now, as he starts to turn, I get the most intense feeling of dread, fear, and anxiety rush over me. I can see the profile of his face, and he's just smiling, staring straight ahead. Just as he's about to get all the way around, my mum walked out of her room and asked me if I'm okay. And in the split second that it took to look at her and back at the boy, he was now gone. I instantly felt better, and it was as if he just never even existed. I pointed to the living room, and my mum assumed that I was trying to peek at the presents, so she just tucked me back into bed, and I fell asleep pretty quick, woke up, and I totally forgot about it the next morning. I did get my remote control monster truck that year too, which I was super stoked about. And it was years before it came back to me, and I told my mum about it. She wasn't surprised too, because, well, like I said, a lot of weird stuff happened in that house. Before I got my car in my freshman year of college, I would use Lyft to get to work pretty much every day during the summer. During the winter or fall, though, I just walked, even at night. And in all of those Lyft cars and drivers, I never had any noticeable encounters, I guess. I've probably been in a couple of hundred by now, and aside from the occasional political opinion and speeder, it was all fine for the most part. Now one day, I order a Lyft car like normal. It'll be here in like 7 minutes. Cool. I walk outside a couple of minutes early to go and wait for my driver, and I see a vehicle that pretty much matches the description of mine sitting in my driveway. You know, that sort of little car icon next to the profile that you can use to compare the real one? Well, it was the same color, the same size, and unless you notice the little details, it pretty much looked the same. But my driver was still apparently 2 minutes away. I choose to ignore him, thinking that it's just a funny coincidence and maybe he's a friend of a neighbor or something. But then he rolls down his window and looks at me, so I go up to talk to him. Maybe he's just lost? By the way, too, a different race entirely from my actual driver, so I know for sure that it isn't him, but it's similar skin tones and age, I guess. He tells me that he's my driver, and pulls out his phone that has my profile like how your driver has to make sure that it's you. So in my naive and innocent teenage mind, I think to myself, oh, Lyft must have accidentally sent me 2 drivers, and tell him that he's not the driver that I was told I would meet. Right as we're talking, my actual driver pulled up and rolled down his window. I explained the situation and said that I'll probably get in the first guy's car because, well, he was here first. But then my actual driver says that I should probably go with whoever is on my phone. That sounded pretty logical to me and made sense. But before I could turn around and tell the other guy that I was going to go ahead and pick the other guy, he drove off. Tinted windows, by the way. It wasn't until I got into the car that my driver brought it to my attention how weird that actually was. He told me that in his 10 years of being a Lyft driver that nothing like that had ever happened to him or anyone that he knew. Then it suddenly dawned on me about what might have just happened. The similar car appearance to my actual driver, the fact that he had my info but I didn't have his, the fact that he was there a couple of minutes early so if I did get in, it wouldn't have intercepted my real driver. And just everything. And, stupidly, I almost got into his car, too. I went to work and I was totally shaken up that day. I tried making a report to Lyft, but without any evidence or information other than a basic physical description, there really wasn't much that they could do. My Lyft driver said that he would go ahead and tell the story to some other driver friends on a social media forum, Facebook probably, so that they could spread the word. And so, I guess that made me feel a little bit better about the whole thing. But that driver, he might have actually saved my life that day, and I think about him a lot. And hey, my dad heard about it too and got me a car in the end. So I guess at least I got something other than trauma. I've also only told a couple of people in real life due to the traumatic and scary nature of the whole thing. Looking back on it now, it was most likely a trafficker or kidnapper. These guys probably have access to Lyft servers and look for repeating customers like me. I've since deleted the app and my account, but I guess the lesson from all of this is always check the license plates. "25+ years ago, I was friends with a married couple that lived in a raised ranch on the mountain in a modestly populated area. Their door was always open and I was a frequent visitor. Since the first time that I was at that house, I always felt uneasy, like there was some type of a presence there quietly observing. Quick backstory too is that the land the house was built on was Native American territory back in the day, and I later came to learn and experience many phenomena, but I'll focus on this one story. So, I was to meet my friends at the house for an evening out. But they were both working and probably not home yet, but I decided to wait for them there. I drove there and took the corner on their street. Pitch black, not unusual, no street lights. As I near the house, I notice all the lights are on, inside, outside, post light, and I think that they must be home. Chills run through me though, and I decide to pull into the driveway because neither of their cars are there. I sat in the driveway for a minute, looking around, listening, with a heavy type of feeling coming over me, yet decided to turn my car off and go in anyway. I get to the front door, gently turn the knob, and slowly open their door. Peeking inside, I see nothing and hear nothing, but all of the lights are still on. I hesitated to go any further, I call out, "Hello," still standing in the doorway, looking up the stairs. And in one moment, all the lights suddenly went out, including the ones outside. I immediately froze in fear. Total darkness and total silence. My arm felt heavy shutting the door and attempting to get back to my car while guided by moonlight. It was weird because it was as if weights were on my ankles and I struggled to make it inside of my car. My hands were shaking so bad that I barely was able to get the key in the ignition. I felt tightness in my chest and I was shaking and I couldn't breathe. Just a total feeling of hopeless dread engulfed me. I parked on the road by the mailbox, sat there staring at the house in darkness trying to compose myself for I don't even know how long. Eventually though, the wife pulled up and I put the window down. "You could have gone in, you know," she says before looking at my face and asking what was wrong. I just pointed at her house. She parked in the driveway and she walked back to my car while her husband was pulling in. He comes down and asks why we're outside, and I told them that I'll wait here while they get ready. The wife then asks though, "Something happened, didn't it?" I nodded yes to this, still shaking. The wife looked at the husband and says, "It's starting up again." I was close friends with them for many years, even staying there temporarily, and their house, let's just say that it had quite the history. At the start of COVID, during the 2-week lockdown, my dad, very concerned, said, "Frank, please don't think that I'm crazy, but I swear that I saw 3 grey aliens walking across the street and then they went into the woods." I asked him how tall. He said very skinny creatures, about 4 feet tall. 2 days later as well, and I'm not joking, a military person sky-dived into their community. I witnessed it while we were driving back into the neighborhood, and we were like, what the actual heck? White vans running in and out of the neighborhood non-stop. You would see them at least 20 to 30 times per day, which made me believe that something happened that was far beyond COVID. To add to all of this, about a month later, my dad randomly leaves the house while I'm visiting, says that he wants to go and be with God. He's completely at peace, acting totally normal, leaves the house and walks down the street. The cops pick him up though. The cops call me, and when I'm on the phone with the cop, he says, "Hang on real quick." Then I hear, oh no, then a loud gunshot. At this point, obviously I'm panicking, thinking that my dad was shot. A totally different cop gets on the phone. I hadn't talked to this guy before, says, "Sorry, that was unrelated. Your dad is fine and we'll bring him home now." In that moment, I literally thought to myself, was the original cop that I talked to shot and replaced or something? Did he see one of those greys and had to shoot it? He was in complete panic with his voice, but the next cop on the phone was completely fine, as if nothing had happened. Anyway, that was weird, and Dad comes home with them and instead says that he wants to go and check himself into a hotel for a few days. So they offer to drive him to the hotel. Dad turns off his phone, won't let anybody come and visit him, has no communication with us during this time, says that he just wants to be alone. Eventually he comes back home after the few days like nothing happened whatsoever, and to this day says, "I don't want to talk about what happened that night." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it was weird. Like, can you explain what happened and why you felt that way?" And he's just like, "No, I don't want to get into that." Personally, I think that he saw something, or something serious happened, and he's concerned that if he says something that he'll be labeled insane. But what do you guys think about this? I legit got scared thinking that they replaced my dad or something. The grey alien thing was super weird too, and it was really weird to hear a loud gunshot on the phone and then suddenly I'm speaking to a different cop. I remember when the cops came by the house to drop him off as well, and their demeanor was just incredibly weird. I dare say, almost like they were not human. They just didn't act right. My fiance and I went for a 3-day trip to Gatlinburg, and we've spent our days in the mountains hiking and spending time in and around the national park. Tonight, at around midnight, trying to get all the time in the mountains that we can, we decided to take an hour drive from our hotel room up the mountain to an overview or lookout type of spot right on top of said mountain to see if we can catch an awesome look at the stars, because there's a lot of lights in Gatlinburg at night. Driving up there, neither of us noticed literally anything off, other than that the mountain and the winds are a little spooky at night. I'm from Florida, so it's just unfamiliar, I guess. But as soon as we got to where we were going and she and I got out of the car, I'm almost overwhelmed with just a vile, oppressive feeling outside with me. But not wanting to make the lady uncomfortable, I don't react too much just yet. The wind is absolutely roaring, and unfortunately, we couldn't see any stars due to cloud cover, so I tell her that I'm going to step to the side and pee, and then we can get back to the hotel room. Now, as soon as I get like 10 feet away, I get a very strange feeling of extreme vulnerability and detachment from everything around me, almost as though I'm miles away from the nearest person, though obviously I'm feet away from my fiancée. I turn around to walk back to the car, and that was when I heard something off to my right, and instinctively looked over to see something roughly human size go down to coyote size and kind of just hop over a rail from about 200 feet, maybe more, feet away. I quickly get back to the car and usher my fiancée in, still not trying to scare her, or at least show her that I'm scared. But she asked if I was alright, and my reaction was a dead giveaway. We jumped in and we sped off. Never in my life have I ever experienced anything like this, and never in my life have I ever really had a reason to be made uncomfortable of just being outside. But I truly believe that I saw something weird that night in those woods with us. One evening, I was out in Lacey, WA, to pick up a handgun that I had recently purchased for protection. Contrary to the pickup status both online and sent to my mail, the store didn't have it in stock yet and told me to come back in another week. I lived about an hour from Lacey at the time, and when I had gotten there, evening rush hour was just beginning to become unbearable. I didn't want to drive all the way back home just yet, as it would add an additional hour to my already long commute anyway. Side note too is that the car that I was driving belonged to my dad, and I was borrowing it until I had enough money saved up for a new car, after my beloved Honda had broken down the previous year. But I killed some time bumming around the store, and I purchased my firearm then decided to drive over to the nearest coffee shop. It was a newly built cabin-style cafe with a modern twist. The barista handed me my 16-ounce dirty chai, and I walked back out to my car. I then drove to a gas station around the corner, still trying to kill some time until traffic thinned out. The car didn't need any gas or anything, so I pulled into a parking spot right at the corner of the four-way street, the block that the gas station was on. I turned off the engine and stepped outside and lit up a smoke, leaning against the driver's side door so as to not stink up the interior. The weather was overcast and drizzly, but not overly cold. It was now dusk and most daylight had disappeared. The stoplights in the intersection were diffused by the late autumn mist, and I watched them flicker from green to yellow to red, and again as the traffic was orchestrated accordingly. Zoned out by the lights and being generally lost in thought while enjoying my coffee and smoke, I didn't notice the man walking toward me until he was already halfway across the street. He was white, average height, strawberry blonde, maybe in his mid-20s. He definitely hadn't changed his clothes in a good while and carried a backpack that I assumed to be full of the few belongings that he had. He didn't smell, but he looked raggedy and unkempt for sure. My immediate thought was that drugs were likely a part of his habitual lifestyle. I didn't want to jump to conclusions though, but I'm always cautious, having grown up in the suburbs of Seattle. The man finished crossing the street, awkwardly limping toward my car, maintaining eye contact and a winced grin. I locked my car out of caution, but remained outside smoking casually. Normally, I'm not a social person, but I don't go out of my way to be unpleasant either. He approached me and stood about 10 feet away when he said hello and asked if I had a light. I complied hesitantly, but saw no harm in meeting his simple request. Taking 2 steps forward, I lit his cigarette, which he was holding out toward me while approaching. He attempted to make small talk, weaving in hints that he had just gotten off the bus and still needed to get down the road another block. Somewhere in this poorly crafted sob story, he stopped himself mid-sentence like a bad actor and pretended to be struck by an epiphany. "Hey, would you mind just dropping me off down the road? It's not very far." I apologized and said that I couldn't because it was my dad's car and not my own, and I didn't feel comfortable without my father's permission. I admit it was a stupid yet plausible excuse I came up with on the spot. Mr. Unkempt did not like my answer, and his smile immediately turned tense and flatlined. Clearly upset, he became more insistent. "But it's just down the road," he whined. "My leg is killing me, and it wouldn't even be far for you. I'll give you a cigarette." His persistence and sudden burst of hostility made my hair stand up. I firmly said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't help you. It's my dad's car and he has set the rules." With 10 years of hospitality under my belt, I immediately offered him alternate logical ideas of what he could do to get where he needed to be. I even mentioned maybe someone in the gas station that we're outside of, maybe they could help him out, or call him a ride or something. Each word that I said made him increasingly irate, and he began curling his fingers into fists, not in a threatening way, but like a toddler about to scream bloody murder for not getting their way. He seemed to pause and size me up in a fleeting moment. I'm small and I'm not at all intimidating physically, so I told him that I hope he makes it home safe, quickly unlocked my car, jumped in and locked myself inside. When looking up from locking the car door, I saw him speed walking back across the street from the direction that he originally came from. No limp, no awkward walk whatsoever, no distress or pain showing even slightly, just a normal speed walk of a physically well person, a rageful person. I knew then that I had dodged a bullet, and I felt pretty dumb for hanging around the city after dark alone like that. At that point, I didn't care about traffic anymore, so I turned over my engine and hightailed it home in what ended up being an hour and 45-minute drive. But this time, the traffic was 100% worth the inconvenience. So, if you haven't heard it enough already, be careful who you give your attention to, especially when you're alone like this. Stay aware always and err on the side of caution, even when strangers seem harmless at first. A couple of months ago, my friend and I had a spontaneous idea to hike at sunset and eat Subway on the beach. We went to a place called Morse Mountain. We walked the trail for about an hour, and right when we got to the beach, it was just about pitch black outside. We hadn't thought to bring anything but some weed and some Subway. No flashlights or headlamps or hiking shoes or anything. Dumb idea, I know, but anyway, all was well for about the 2 hours that we laid on the beach smoking and eating and talking about life. It was beautiful hearing the waves and seeing a sky full of stars that night. I started getting tired, so I decided that we should probably head back. We gathered our stuff and started walking and both turned on our phone flashlights to guide our way. Not even a minute into the trail, we hear something moving in the forest to our left. I told my friend to stop, and the sound suddenly stops too. Immediately, when we start walking again, the swishing is there and it's matching the exact pace that we are walking. So we stop again to test if this sound is really matching our pace. I was hoping that it was an animal just curious about who we were and would walk away, but the sound once again stops when we stop. My heart starts pounding because, well, there's no animal that I know of that is intelligent enough to match the exact pace and the exact steps that we are making. At least, not where we live. And my friend and I turned our flashlights to the left where the sound was coming from. And it was then that I make eye contact with something in the distance that was pale and had dead black eyes and looked like it was standing on its hind legs with terrible posture. My friend and I quickly turn our flashlight to point directly in front of us and say, "Please tell me that was an animal. Was it?" And my friend, in a very monotone voice, says, "No, we need to leave. Now, keep your eyes forward." For the rest of the hike, the trees and branches, they look like symbols and some even look like nooses. I felt like the forest was telling us to leave, or at least communicating some danger to us or something. Maybe it was just my imagination in the heat of the moment, I'm not sure, but I could have swore that I saw things. After about an hour, we finally made it back to the car, and I asked my friend if they noticed anything about the trees, and they also described the symbols. My friend called their mum on the drive home, and she said, "I'm just happy that you weren't in the Appalachians." The next morning, my friend calls me and says, "We're idiots. We were in the Appalachians last night." I haven't been able to stop thinking about what we saw that night. I also want to add that my friend and we didn't smoke much and are both stoners, so we don't chalk it up to the weed or anything. In any case, if you have any ideas as to what I experienced that night, then I would genuinely love to hear it. This happened about 6 years ago when I was 20. So, I came home after sleeping at my boyfriend's place. It was like 8 a.m. Super early because my boyfriend started his shift that early, and my parents were already gone like an hour earlier on their holiday. So I was alone at home and I knew it. I came home and I directly went to my bedroom to continue my night, but before climbing the stairs, there's 2 floors, I saw the kitchen door or window was wide open. I was surprised by this, but I just thought that maybe my parents accidentally left it open. You have to know that my father is super paranoid though, and really there was no way that he would have forgot to close it, especially the windows before leaving the house for like 2 weeks. Plus, I was sleeping at my boyfriend's place, so there was definitely nobody home and he would have known that. Anyway, I was barely awake, so I just closed the door. I checked the kitchen and the living room just to be sure, and then I went to go to my room. There are 3 rooms on the 2nd floor, and I went to change in my room. Then I went to the bathroom, and I go back to my room. I closed the door to my room, and I didn't know why, but I never really did this normally. In any case, I was scrolling on my phone, and like 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps right behind my door. Somebody was definitely there the whole time while I was doing my life, just sort of vulnerably like this. I was terrified. My heart stopped. I couldn't move, and I just took the first thing in front of me to defend myself, my babyless. I stared at my door, waiting for the person to open up and kill me or worse. I was ready to jump out of the window and die if I saw the door opened. Minutes passed, and I heard the person on the stairs. I don't know how long I stayed there, immobile, but eventually I called my boyfriend, and thankfully he came to the rescue. At first, I genuinely thought maybe I was going crazy because, I didn't see anything, and I couldn't believe that it really happened. But my boyfriend confirmed later that they had definitely forced the door or the windows in the kitchen open, so they were really there. They were silently waiting for me to sleep, I guess, so that they could get out of my house. I was home alone, feeling completely safe, but the whole time I wasn't. It was traumatic, and I could barely stay alone somewhere without freaking out to this day. I do live alone, and I'm constantly paranoid that someone is trying to break in. But the worst part is that they didn't take anything. My mum's MacBook and jewelry were there, my PS4 was there, my dad's gaming setup. Everything was so easy to take, but they didn't take a thing. I can't stop thinking that they were here for, well, another reason. You also have to know that at that time I was very active on Snapchat. I used to post every day, and I used to tell and put my story up every day as well. So the 5K of unknown followers that I had on social media, they knew everything about me at this time, and I personally think that it must have been related. Since then, I have stopped my activities on Snapchat, and thankfully, nothing else has happened. When I was 12 years old, in 2007, I was home alone babysitting my two younger siblings while my parents, they were out at an event. It was summertime, so it stayed light out for a while into the evening. Just as it was starting to get dark though, I went into the kitchen to make a bowl of popcorn to watch a movie with my brother and sister. When I looked out the kitchen window, I saw that there was a car parked hiding in the tree line of our yard. For context, we lived in a fairly rural place, and we rarely had people out our direction unless they lived down our gravel road, and we knew our neighbor's car, so this was a junky beater and the license plates had been taped over as well. It was definitely not one of our neighbors. I was a kid who was pretty aware of my surroundings at the time, and I decided to step back from the big kitchen window and go into the dark entryway hall to get a better look. There was just a single man sitting in it, staring directly at the house with the lights off. Immediately upon noticing that, I locked the front and the back door. I told my little brother and sister calmly to play in their room and not to come out until I came and got them for the movie night. I then went back to the kitchen to get the phone to call my mother, but she didn't answer. I watched him through the curtains sit in the dark tree line and stare at the house for what felt like ages. Finally, somebody else drove down the road and their headlights reflected off the car. He started the engine, drove out of the trees, and seemed to book it down the gravel. I was still pretty nervous and tried calling my mother again, but again there was no answer. For the rest of the time, I just played with my siblings in their room with the door shut and the curtains pulled until my parents came home later that night. When I tried telling my parents what had happened, they were convinced that I was making it up and that I was just being a dramatic kid. But I swore up and down that I saw this car with blacked out plates in the tree line, and they just weren't interested at all. I know that I saw it, but really I'm the only one who did. Maybe it was just a random guy who didn't know that there were 3 young kids home alone hiding for some other reason, but still, I'm really glad that I locked all the doors that evening because, honestly, who knows what could have happened. To start this off, I need to give some context. I'm 23 and I currently live in New York City, but I have grandparents who live down in rural West Virginia. When I say rural, I mean the literal boonies. Their closest neighbors are over an hour away in a small town with a few houses and a Walmart. Last summer, my grandfather, who I just call Robert for privacy reasons, had surgery done on his hip. The majority of my family lives on the West Coast, and my grandmother, Muriel, is very old and wouldn't have been able to take care of Robert. Because I was the closest family member, I was the one that they asked to come down there and help out my grandfather. And, being the good grandson that I am, I agreed to come down there for 2 weeks while he recovered from his surgery. Fast forward a week, everything was going fine. All I really had to do was help my grandfather up and down the stairs and walk his dog, a blue heeler named Rocky. Normally, my grandfather would walk Rocky once in the morning and once at night through the woods behind their property, but because of the surgery, that responsibility had fallen onto me. This was the part that I hated about helping him because ever since I was a kid, I never really liked those woods behind the property. Whenever I'd go down there as a kid, me and my cousins would always get creeped out going into that forest. It always just felt off for some reason, but anyways, for the first week, walking Rocky in the forest at night was fine, even if it was a bit creepy. That was until one night, a week into my stay, I was walking him through the forest. It was around 8:30 and the sun was setting over the Appalachian Mountains. Everything was going normal, until I heard a strange whistle that sounded like it was only around 20 yards away. Both me and the dog stopped dead in our tracks and looked towards the direction the whistling was coming from. I shined my flashlight in that direction, but I didn't see anything, so I had just assumed that it was a bird. Looking back though, it definitely wasn't a bird. There's no nocturnal birds that chirp and whistle out there, and it sounded more musical than anything a bird could whistle anyway. But the dog was spooked. He wouldn't stop growling and staring at whatever was back there, and he kept trying to back up until whatever or whoever this thing was whistled again, to which the dog started barking and going absolutely crazy. At this point, I decided that I definitely didn't want to stay there, so I yanked on the dog's leash and we both bolted out of the woods and straight back home. When we got back, I told my grandparents what had happened. They both seemed spooked, and my grandmother immediately asked if I whistled back. I told her that I didn't, and she seemed relieved, but told me that I didn't hear anything and to just ignore it. I asked why, and she wouldn't tell me, and would instead just tell me that I didn't hear anything. I decided not to press it any further, and I just went to bed, terrified and wondering what she seemed to be so freaked out about. Now, the next morning she told me that instead of walking Rocky through the woods, I could just take him on laps around the house, and so that's what I started doing. Every night I would take Rocky for around 50 laps around the house before going back inside. On Friday, the third to last day that I would stay there, at night I was taking the dog for laps as usual, until I heard that same creepy whistle behind the attached garage this time, which was only around 10 yards from the house. This time, I immediately took the dog back inside and locked the doors. The rest of the night, I put my earbuds in and I ignored any more whistling like my grandmother told me to. To this day, I really still don't know what the whistling in the woods was all about. Some of my friends said that it was a skinwalker, but that's a Navajo thing, and there's almost no Navajo in West Virginia. My girlfriend, who stayed back in New York City, asked her Muslim parents, who are from Yemen, and they said that whistling at night is a sign that a jinn is nearby. I don't know about any of that, and I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, it had my grandparents legitimately scared. I've heard of weird stuff happening in Appalachia, but this really is the first time that I've ever had a first-hand experience with it. So, that's why I'm here. Do any of you guys have any idea as to what this could have been? So I've lived in a number of houses, and just last night I saw it for the second time, and I have no idea what it is. Around 4 or 5 years ago, I lived in a house built in the 1920s to 1930s, and there was one night that I was sleeping in the basement that I woke up. I've always had difficulty sleeping at night, and consistently woke up between 1 and 4 in the morning. It was an issue that I had from like ages 8 to 16. In any case, I woke up and there was this black mist in the corner of my room. Weirdly too, I wasn't scared, but it just felt like it was there. It was thick enough that I couldn't see through it, but after a moment I shined a flashlight on it with my phone, then turned the light off and it was gone. Fast forward to now, and I just got back home from a 12-day trip. My family moved, so our current home was constructed in the past 10 years. I woke up in the middle of the night. I'm 20 now, so it's been years since I've done that, and looked to my left, and there was a black mist right beside my bed, probably around 4 to 5 feet in height. Again, I wasn't scared, but I just turned back over and said, "I'm safe," and something else that I can't really recall right now, but then I just fell back to sleep. This experience has been interesting for me too, and I wonder what the apparition could be, if it's an apparition at all. My response was unnormal as well, right? I mean, I've been a bit stressed lately, but I also feel revitalized since going to see some family on vacation. In any case, if you've got any ideas as to what this was, then please do share, and if you can provide any help with this, then I would love to hear from you. When we were kids, my brother and I slept in the same room in a bunk bed. I was always a heavy guy, so I'd sleep on the bottom and he slept up top. we both remember this night to this day, which obviously could just be because we've talked about it so many times over the years and have tricked our brains into treating it as fact, but, still. Anyway, we're both asleep, and at the foot of our bed is a window. There's a streetlight across the road, so there was literally always some light coming through the curtains. We always sleep with our heads towards the other way, so that window would be at our feet. I'm not entirely sure what woke me up, but when I did, I just had that overwhelming feeling of somebody watching me. I wake up and open my eyes, and at the foot of my bed is a literal shadow person. And I mean, you could very clearly see the personage's outline with the lit up curtain behind him. Like, absolutely pitch black against a white lit up cloth curtain. He was definitely wearing a hat, but like just a hat, like a baseball sort of trucker shaped hat. He was also two-hand holding what looked like a firefighter's woodcutting axe. It was pretty long, I recall, but I just kind of sat there for a good minute, completely frozen in fear. He didn't move at all that I can remember, but after a minute or two, in the deepest and most gruff voice that I've ever heard, he just says, "One day." At that, I flipped and hid under the covers because, as a child, I couldn't think of anything else that I could do. After another minute passed, I just hear my brother's shivering voice say, "John, did you see that too?" I answered that I had, and we just kind of laid there in silence, and eventually we both drifted off back to sleep, I guess. But we both swear that we remember it like 20 years later. I'm also wondering if anybody else has heard of an experience or something similar to this, as we have no idea what it was that we saw and haven't seen anyone say that they've experienced something like this. Theories we've tossed around go from just a straight-up demon or evil spirit to a literal home intruder to a Grim Reaper type thing. That last one always seemed to make sense to me because of what it said to us, but it never did show up again for either of us. Our mum took over that room a while after for a few years, then I took it for a few, and now my brother still lives back at home and it's his room. So we've all had ample time with nothing happening, which is a bit weird, right? So when I was in kindergarten or first grade, about 22 to 23 years ago, I saw an apparition that seems, well, very cliche. An old woman in a white dress, no lips with snarling teeth, black eyes, floating and no visible feet. At first, I heard this woman's footsteps coming down the hallway on the hardwood floor. Then I saw her come to the end of the hallway, my room on the right, my mum's on the left. This woman stopped at the end of the hallway and slowly looked back and forth between the rooms, her head oscillating like a fan, slow but consistent. She then turned around and walked away slowly, footsteps fading into nothing. At this time, I shared a room with my brother, 4 years older than me, who was also awake and saw the woman too. I called his name quietly and he said, "Shut up, I see her too, put your blanket over your head." I've asked him multiple times throughout our lives about this happening and he has zero recollection of it. So I assumed in the end that it was just an extremely vivid dream that was stuck with me for my whole life. I never brought this story up with anybody else, well, until recently. You see, my mother and I were talking about some paranormal experiences that we'd had throughout our lives. I said something about the Carmel house, but never went into detail, and she proceeded to explain to me the exact same woman that I saw wearing a white dress at the end of the hallway, looking back and forth between our rooms. Honestly, I felt sick. This apparition was no longer a vivid dream. I mean, that actually happened. She was real. She was there and she was looking at me. But how many times did she actually do that while I was asleep and I never saw her? I have a lot of questions that really I don't have answers to, but I will say that without a question, I am a believer now. Several years ago, I was living in College Station, Texas. The job market there is really rough for anyone outside of academia, but I landed a job as a sales consultant for a digital marketing company, or at least that's what I was told. After I started, I found out my job would really be in door-to-door sales, trying to sell digital marketing packages and, well, phone book ads to small businesses. The company was terrible, the managers were pure evil, and the product was awful. I was looking for a new job, but I needed a paycheck. Now one day, they sprang something on us. From now on, we would only spend half of the year in College Station. The other half we would be living in a hotel in Abilene, selling phone book ads there. My wife was so understanding about this. I'd be able to come back home on the weekends, and I had a few promising leads for work too. I figured that I'd only need to spend a month or so there. Now, the first time I'm heading out, I actually quite enjoy the view on the trip. Lots of small towns and interesting landscapes. But even better, I look down at my phone as I'm partway through my trip, and I'm making way better time than expected. Like way better, an hour ahead of schedule. In fact, I was certain that I had checked my phone before, and that hadn't been the case. But the clock on the dash confirmed it. And that was when I was just pulling through a town called Rising Star. I'm a big horror and occult fan, and immediately made a mental connection to Lucifer, since it means morning star, and gave myself a bit of a chuckle. It was a small town, but despite it being broad daylight, I was surprised to see, well, really no one. I mean, I didn't see a single person. I slowed down, looking into the windows, but nothing. It was summer, and there weren't even any kids around playing in their yards or anything. I saw parked cars, but no one driving or sitting in one. That's when I passed what I seem to recall being an old brick drugstore. There on the side of the building was a mural of a man with a bunch of snakes dangling from his mouth. It really creeped me out, especially with my previous Lucifer connection. A part of me was tempted to stop somewhere, just to see if I could find a human being at some point. But that mural, something about it changed my mind. And as soon as I left that town, I looked at my phone and my car's clock again. They were both an hour ahead of where they had been before. I did research later, and there was an innocent explanation about the mural involving a local celebrity who participated in a lot of rattlesnake roundups, and I think had a Guinness record for doing something like this. I can look up his name again later if anybody's curious, but still, that time fluctuation and the eerie absence of people, something about it just didn't feel right, and it still haunts me. I also regularly have nightmares about that place to this day, which is strange. In any case, I took a different route from then on and soon found a new job as well, but I always joke with my friends that I have a feeling that I'll be back there one day, and I won't come back. Really though, it's only half a joke, I suppose, because that's always what happens in my nightmares. When I was 19, about 20-ish years ago now, I was renting a flat and lived alone. On the first night there, I was laying in bed trying to sleep when all of a sudden I heard loud footsteps running up my hallway and stopping just outside of my bedroom door. Instantly I sat up, expecting the door to swing open, but then there was silence and nothing else happened as I sat there. A few nights later I was trying to sleep and then I could hear someone breathing. It sounded like they were standing to the side of the bed near my head, but I couldn't see anyone there. After that, every few nights, I would hear the breathing right behind me as well, regardless of what room I was in, at various times during the day, but mostly at night. What really freaked me out though and confirmed things was that one time I had a friend staying over. We were watching TV in the living room and the breathing started. He looked at me and goes, "Is that you breathing?" And the only thing that I could think to answer was, "No, that just happens sometimes." I only stayed there until my 6-month lease ran out because I was way too freaked out and tried to sleep at friends' houses as much as I could. The day that I was moving out, I noticed footprints on the ceiling of all places. The ceiling was also way too high up for anyone to be able to put their bare feet on it. It was a freaky place to live, and I was glad to leave it behind. This story is from about 5 years ago when I worked security for a large office or furniture manufacturer in Michigan. I did mainly foot and vehicle patrols of primarily the 3 factory plants, but occasionally the corporate office buildings and an older home that the company bought and refurbished. The company would use the home for tours for the public, and they would use it for some wow factor for potential buyers they flew in to make a sale. For more reference, this home was designed by a famous architect and is known for its style and large bay windows and painted glass. The home, it was built in the early 1900s, and as far as I'm aware, no one ever died in the home or anything like that. Now, I worked midnight shifts, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and we had a bit of a storm rolling in the night of my shift. At about 1:30 a.m., the control operator received a fire alarm fault from the fire panel at the home, and when compared to prior alarms that night, and the weather that we were experiencing, it was presumed that the power had gone out and, when it came back on, set off the fire alarm fault. So, I was dispatched as a precaution to ensure everything was okay, and to reset the fire alarm panel. I got to the home at around 1:45 in the morning, and made my way into the home. I had been there a handful of other times, and fellow security guards had told me about weird occurrences that had happened around the house over the years. The main story was about them seeing the light on upstairs and a black silhouette of a figure standing in the window just watching them. There were also stories from the tour guides of the home that stated that the dolls in the nursery would be found in different locations from when they last saw them when nobody else was entering that room. Anyways, I made my way to the basement, which is where the fire alarm panel was located. I reset the panel and attempted to radio to the control operator to see if the fault had reset. At this time it was around 2 a.m. and my radio was completely just refusing to operate. It was making weird noises when I tried to key it up and kept losing signal. I didn't think too much of it and pulled my phone out and called them instead. I was able to establish a phone call, but it kept cutting out and had a lot of feedback until the call finally dropped and my phone went into SOS. In any case, I decided to do a bit of a walkthrough of the house since I was already there and wanted to kill some time anyway. I went back upstairs, walked through the kitchen, into the dining room and into the living room. The large windows noted earlier are primarily in the living room. The lights were old in the home and they were operated by buttons on the walls and not switches, but I elected to just use my flashlight instead. I walked into the living room and did a quick once-over of the room with my flashlight, and for a split second, in the reflection of the bay window, I could have sworn that I saw an old man seated in the chair, sitting less than 5 feet away from me. He was staring at me through the reflection with an eerily emotionless face. I sort of doubled back while questioning what I just saw, but the image was now burned into my mind. When I looked back there was nothing. I immediately felt uneasy though, and I paused momentarily, but elected to continue my walkthrough of the home. The staircase was beside the living room and went up to a landing, maybe about 10 feet long, which proceeded to another staircase to the second floor. I proceeded up the stairs and stepped into the landing, and I cannot describe the feeling that rushed over me into words. It was like something out of the movies. All of the hair on my body stood up and my face went cold as all the blood just rushed away and I had an immediate sense of danger. Needless to say, I sprinted out of that home to my patrol vehicle and sped off without looking back. They eventually pulled the video footage of me sprinting out of the house and it was a bit of a joke for a while, but I know what I saw and I know what I felt. Sometimes I wonder if the people working there now are told of my weird and interesting story. I wonder if any of them ever had their own encounters or experiences. Really though, who knows? I personally really don't have much experience with the supernatural. However, my late best friend, who passed away over 20 years ago when we were 19, once told me about the following encounter that she had, and I would like to see if anybody else has had any similar experiences or sightings to this. So, she told me that when she was 7 or 8, she and her dad were napping on a big pallet after watching a movie in their living room. It was the middle of the day on a weekend. Their living room, in which her dad still lives, has big glass panes on one wall overlooking the back patio. The house sits on some significant acreage in the brushy woods of central Texas. No neighbors within at least half a mile, likely more. But my friend said that she woke up from a nap to see a woman standing right outside the big window, covered in rags, possibly pelts even, with leaves and twigs in her hair. I think she described her as old, but I can't remember with absolute certainty. As my friend looked at her though, the woman started opening her mouth, and apparently it just kept getting wider and wider, well beyond normal human capabilities. She shook her dad awake and screamed for him to look out at the window, and when they both looked, she was gone. She swore up and down that it wasn't a dream though. Her dad didn't believe her, of course, but I did, and I still do. She was my soul sister, and I knew when she was being truthful. So, does anyone have any ideas? I've looked into Baba Yaga and various forest hags, etc., but the widening mouth never seems to be a distinct feature of anything I've come across over the years. So, is there anything else like this that sounds familiar? I cannot pinpoint exactly when I first began to experience this. Best that I can remember is I was around the age of 10 to 11, although it's possible the occurrences began a little earlier than this. However, I vividly remember being scared of my bedroom window once it got dark outside because of what I regularly saw. On numerous occasions, I would see the same face in the bottom left-hand corner on the outside of the window, just looking in at me. For context, my bedroom at the time was on the second floor of the house, so no possibility this was just somebody walking by the window, unless they were like over 15 feet tall, that is. Despite this occurring over 20 years ago now, for context I'm in my mid-30s, I can still recall that face too. It was distinctly male, with thin unkempt hair, the skin pulled in as though the figure was starved. If I had to age the figure, my best guess would be in its 30s, maybe 40s. Oddly though, the one detail I can't remember are the eyes. The reason that I can remember this much detail though is because it was always the same face, always in the same position. Seeing this figure always gave me a sense of dread, and I would do whatever I could to pretend that it wasn't there watching me. I would suddenly glue my eyes to my TV or pick up a book and start reading, hoping that it would leave me alone. I didn't have curtains in my bedroom, so I didn't have that as an option back then, and whenever I called my parents to check, they never saw anything, and simply passed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. That dread that I felt whenever I saw the figure would stay with me for the rest of the night until I eventually managed to fall asleep. When I did sleep, I would have these really upsetting dreams almost every night. Dreams of being chased and, in a lot of cases, even being killed. I remember speaking to my therapist about a reoccurring dream that I would have where I was chased and thrown off a bridge that I had to cross on my walk to school with, but they didn't read much into it. To this day, in fact, I have issues sleeping. My partner has mentioned several times that I have a tendency to whimper in my sleep as if frightened. I can never sleep through a full night either, waking up at least 2 or 3 times for no reason. I also still try to avoid going past windows at night, unless the windows are drawn first, and even then I still feel slightly uneasy. And it wasn't just seeing the figure in the window either. There would be occasions I would go and turn on the light in my room, but it just wouldn't work. It would turn on and the bulb would do something, but the light was just very dim. Just a dark orange glow, barely lighting anything up. The first time this happened, I instinctively knew something was wrong, and every subsequent time instilled that same anxiety. The bit that I never got to understand was why it happened. Every time it did, I would quickly turn the light back off and call my parents. They would come up and turn the light on for me, and everything worked fine. For some unexplainable reason, it was only ever when I was alone that the light played up like this, just as it was only ever when I was alone that I would see the figure in the window, as if it was trying to mess with my mind or just didn't want to make its presence known to anyone else. After several years of this, my sister started to become frightened of a grey figure stalking my father around the house, which only she could ever see. On one occasion, she started screaming and crying for apparently no reason. When we managed to calm her down enough to speak, she told us that she saw the figure reaching out trying to stab my father in the back. It was at this point that I definitely knew that something wasn't right and confided in the school chaplain. We weren't a religious family in any sense, but I attended a Catholic high school, and at this point, I didn't really know who else to turn to. The school chaplain came over to the house and blessed the premises. Whilst it wasn't a full exorcism or anything, he made sure to bless every room, anointing the doorways with holy water. And whatever it was that we experienced in all those strange occurrences, it all just stopped following the visit from the chaplain that day. We moved house roughly 18 months after that. I've lived in several houses since then and have never experienced the figure again, but as mentioned, I'm still anxious about going near windows at night, so its effects upon me are still very real. Whatever it was I did experience, what my family experienced, I can't say for sure. Perhaps a ghost or some sort of malevolent entity, I really have no idea, but I wanted to share my experience nonetheless and see what you guys think. Many years ago, before cell phones, I, a 20-year-old female then, had driven over to visit my grandmother and was on my way home. She lived in a very nice part of town. I'd only recently got my driver's license, and in my state, you are required to display P plates in your car windows. The P stands for probationary, but we used to say pick on me or perv magnet plates. In other words, just displaying those plates on your car pretty much guaranteed that you were going to be hassled on the road as a young person. And also, if you drove a small white sedan, you were likely to be female, which was all the more reason to be hassled on the road back then. So, I turned out of my grandmother's street onto the highway. There was no traffic on the highway when I turned onto it, and I had driven no more than 300 meters when I heard this sudden loud honking right behind me, frightening the heck out of me. I stuck my arm out the window and waved, a circle signal, motioning to pass me in case the driver thought that I was going too slow, which I wasn't, mind you. The car then pulled out and began driving right next to me. All of a sudden, though, this creepy older-looking man in an expensive plain white sedan honked again and was motioning at me to pull over to the side of the road and or to wind down my window. I mouthed no at him. He got more insistent and looked angry as he continued driving right next to me, which is also illegal because he was blocking the entire highway. So creepy man let off a couple more short honks to make me look at him again and flashed his black wallet with some sort of raised metal silver-looking crest on it. He was now looking ragingly angry and was pointing at the shield wallet in his hand, like he thought that it meant that he was some sort of secret police and had some sort of authority to pull me over. As far as I was concerned, I had not done anything wrong. He was not police. My car was recently serviced, so I knew that there was nothing wrong with it, which means that there was just no possible reason for this creepy-looking guy to pull me over, and I was starting to feel more than a little frightened at this. I decided to brake suddenly so that I could read his car's rear license plate, in case he tried to run me off the road or something. The plate said CDEC. Weird. I had no idea what that meant other than that it was notably odd. In a split-second decision, though, I chucked an immediately left turn off the highway and drove fast down a few back streets and laneways. This was the area that I had grown up in, walking around with my grandmother, so I knew exactly where I was going. I was so creeped out that I didn't check my rearview mirror though for a couple of turns, so I had no idea if the guy tried to follow me or if he just took off down the highway, but either way, in the end, thankfully I lost him. I went to work on the Monday and told the story, and one of my older colleagues said to me, "That's a consular license plate, which means that the car belongs to a foreign embassy." Intriguing, but I didn't give it much thought, except in years later, retelling the tale when I wanted to explain to people why I have a chip on my shoulder when it comes to middle-aged male drivers, I began to realize that there was something very off about it. Fast forward to now when we have YouTube with endless true crime content on tap, and I watch cold case and true crime shows. Deep in the YouTube comments of a video about a young woman who vanished without a trace was a comment along the lines of, "This sounds similar to a few cold cases around the world, where it is suspected that young women have been abducted by someone working for a foreign embassy, and diplomatic immunity means that they can move around the world and keep doing what they do with impunity." So, my question is, could that have been what that creepy man was trying to do all those years ago on a beautiful sunny summer day? Abduct me in broad daylight. For about 2 years now, I occasionally hear what clearly is a hand hitting the wall between my room and the attic. Now, before anyone says chipmunks or insert vermin, please just rule that out. Trust me, I've had the area inspected by pest control so many times, and there is no visible infestation, and traps and baits were set and to which go undisturbed even to today. If it is not happening from the other side of the bedroom wall in the attic, then the only other place that it can be coming from is the exterior part of the wall. Picture a garage roofline butting up against a house, wherein the attic is above the garage. This has happened at all hours of the day, mind you, and mostly when I'm alone, but it's happened with my wife in the room too. As a matter of fact, my wife and I hear noises in the house frequently, but we are constantly going back and reviewing our security cameras to explain them away, and I would say that a good 80% cannot be explained away. Again, trust me, if anyone is looking for a causation, it is me, a semi-non-believer in the paranormal, but there is just no way to explain this stuff. I've also been in my basement studio and I've heard my wife and kids come through the garage door. I hear the kids running. I have a hot microphone on and studio headphones on as well. I can definitely hear, but when I go upstairs, they're not home yet. There was this one night though when I heard this tapping on the basement bedroom window. This is a finger tapping a window, absolutely clear as day. I'm 43 years old and I know what that sounds like. I also know that there's nothing near that window to make such a sound. I have that window blocked 100% by a perfectly fitted painting, so no one can actually see in or out. This goes on for about 10 minutes, so I sort of sneak down the hall to the kids' playroom. Think of the letter L, and the two windows are equally spaced from the corner. I sneak over, lights are off. I can see very well, except the shadows of the trees being casted by the streetlights. I just sit there for about 10 minutes, but nothing. The tapping seemed to stop too. I didn't even get 2 steps into the hallway though, and I heard that tap one time on the playroom window. I was annoyed at this point, and so I darted towards the door, grabbing one of the guns en route, and I'm telling you that no one could have escaped my eyesight by then. But when I got there, there was no one there. I went back and looked at the cameras, and I did everything that I could think of, but there was just nothing. One thing we have caught on camera though is this very loud foot stomp from our bedroom, just above the living room. I wasn't home, but my wife and kids are visibly startled as the stomp was so hard that the ceiling light flickered. And again, there is just really no explanation for this. And no, I will not accept house settling or vermin. That is clearly a foot stomping the floor so hard that the lights flickered. Now, the main level laundry room separates my studio from our master bathroom on the second level. My wife has a rolling chair at her vanity, and I can hear her rolling around when she's getting ready. I shouldn't, but I do, and well, I've texted her at like 2 or 3 in the morning before, asking why she's rolling up and around like that. But there's always no response, and when I check, she's asleep, so it is definitely not her. Other than that, I hear what sounds like a man tapping his cane on the floor above my studio quite often. I'm an engineer, I get mechanical systems and knocking, and I can assure you that there are no systems or equipment or associated lines in the vicinity that could cause it. Yes, I randomly get scared and hair stand up on my neck occasionally for no reason. Yes, I see something constantly moving in my peripheral upstairs in the hallway. I sleep with the door open and nightlight on and the hallway is always on. Yes, the barn door to the bonus room was closed one morning after I intentionally left it open. Same in the hallway. Whatever this is, I do fear that it's like a small little demon or something. My wife and I watched some documentary on NASA engineers that got haunted by this little guy in the same room. My son, 7 at the time, actually fell asleep in there that night watching some kid movie. I woke him up in the morning, and the first thing that he said was, "I woke up earlier. I heard little footsteps walk around the bed." I said, "Oh, it must have been the dog." And he replied, "No, Dad, it was the footsteps of a small human." My garage caught on fire twice that week too, which is weird, but anyway, there's a lot more to this, but this definitely captures the essence of what's happening here. I don't know what to do about any of this because, well, it's definitely not my forte. Like I said, I've always been a bit skeptical about this stuff, and so I've just never really looked into it. But now that I'm facing it, I would really like some help. This happened back in 2020. I'm a female and was 19 at the time, and my mum used to be a baker. She needed some chocolates for decoration or something. Since my siblings were asleep, my mum asked me to go and get some from the nearby shop. As it was close by, I thought that I would just walk. Most of the shops that I went to were closed due to an ongoing strike. Unfortunately, I was unaware of it, and the ones that were open didn't have the brand of chocolate that my mum wanted. Due to the strike, the place looked a bit like a ghost town, with not a soul in sight. I was determined to get that chocolate though, so I walked a bit farther, but still had no luck. Finally, in the end, I decided to head home. I could reach home either by a long route or a short one. Since the short route includes trespassing through the neighbor's property, I chose the long one instead, mainly because I didn't want to cause any inconvenience to them. Anyway, as I was walking, a van with 2 men passed me and stopped right in the middle of the road, a couple of meters ahead of me. I didn't think too much of it because I assumed that they might be lost and looking for directions. Suddenly though, the man sitting in the passenger seat stuck his head out of the window, turned back and looked at me. His gaze moved in a way that he examined me from head to toe. He then gave me a creepy smile and sat back. I immediately thought to myself, why did he look at me so weirdly? But since it seemed physically harmless, I brushed it off and I just continued walking. Now, the back of the van had this sort of large see-through window, which I could see both men talking to each other right after the creepy gesture from. As I was about to reach the back of the van, the driver did the exact same thing as the guy in the passenger seat. He stuck his head out, turned back to look at me, and sat back, all while smiling creepily. That's when my alarm bells started to ring and I quickly moved away from there. Fortunately, this happened right beside the short route. I immediately changed my direction and started walking towards